Me and my best friend at the time, we came from some pretty abusive home lives. As such, we often sought refuge in the woods near our neighborhood. We did this because, during the day, we would be free of our abusers and adults brushed this off as kids being kids. But on a particularly bad night, my drunk father invited his motorcycle gang over, who were all terrible drunks themselves. They kept coming into my room trying to find me, but I hid away in my hamper, buried under my dirty clothes until they seemed to have given up or gotten too drunk to care. And quietly, after about an hour, I came out of the hamper and snuck out of my back window. We lived in a slab ranch-style house, and my back window went into our backyard, which was unlit and sealed with the exception of a small gate that was blocked by their bikes. I snuck over to the back fence, picked a corner, and climbed over it, tossing myself to the other side. The neighbor behind us watched me cut through his backyard, as he had many times, and let me be. We lived in a village, so everybody sort of knew about my dad, but would never do anything about it. Anyway, I ran to my best friend's house, a mere 2 blocks away, but when I arrived and tapped on her window, her own abusive parents were asleep. Since I couldn't come in and she didn't want me to be outside alone, she climbed out of her window, and the 2 of us walked to the woods. We settled next to a water reservoir meant to store rainwater in case of flooding, and we sat on the hill far from the road's view. She pulled out some snacks that she had brought with her, and we began conversing as 2 teenagers do about this and that. It was about 20 minutes later or so that we heard shuffling from inside of the reservoir. At first, we thought maybe a deer had jumped the chain link fence. Rare, but possible. So we just sort of tried to ignore it. But then it got louder. It was also unusual movement, like a dragging almost, or a scraping sound against the brush. Though these woods were usually empty, especially near the reservoir where we were, save for typical animals, we became concerned that maybe there was another human around out to spook us, or worse. We slowly gathered up our snacks and we moved on from sitting to a sort of crouched position. Once we stood up, we could see, though, what looked like a woman laying against the side of the reservoir's wall, which had a steep incline made of brush and thin twiggy sort of trees. My friend and I became a little bit concerned at that. The state of her clothes, a light-colored dress, had tears and dirt everywhere. She herself looked absolutely soaked, despite it not having rained in months, which is typical for mid-November in my state. Are you okay?" my friend asked in her direction. "Do you need help?" I asked after a little bit of silence. Nothing. The woman didn't move, didn't say anything, and for a moment, we didn't know what to do. It honestly looked like she needed help, so we didn't want to just leave, but, who would we go to? Would she be here if we found help and came back anyway? My best friend and I began to whisper possible options to each other when the shuffling crawl resumed. We turned and looked at the woman's direction, but she wasn't crawling anymore. Instead, she was now sprinting towards us. She was going fast enough that the long disheveled hair that had been obscuring her face moved behind her, and her dark, swollen face was now visible. She had blue lips, white milky eyes, and began to screech all of a sudden. My best friend and I absolutely booked it. We ran as fast as we could to the streetlights and their orange glow, and we could hear her until we crossed the street, and then just silence. We turned back and looked at the fencing, huffing and puffing, looking for any signs of her. We saw nothing, though, and began to talk about how it was probably a senior teen messing with us or something. But then we saw her again, standing inside the fence, just staring at us. The orange glow of the lights hit her, making her features seem soft, if not still unsettling. I took a step in her direction, believing now that she was probably just some sort of crazy homeless woman. She was behind the fence, and the time that it would take her to climb it made me confident. I spoke to her, I told her that she was a creep for scaring us like that, and that it wasn't our fault that she was homeless. I did the front-end motion with my shoulders, if you know, you know, and shouted for her to not be so reckless and mean. This must have made her angry too, as a part of me knew that it probably would have, but she started to rush the fence again. It was a tall fence, so I knew that we could duck through some yards to safety before she hit the ground on the other side. I watched her though, daring her, but she got to the fence and didn't climb it. Instead, she moved through the chain link fence as if it wasn't even there. At that, my best friend grabbed me and we started booking it back towards her house as fast as our legs would carry us. We heard one shout from the woman, a blood-curdling scream, but it sounded like it was fading in the distance, and soon she was gone. We never went back to the reservoir spot after that, and we only ever returned to the woods during the day. After that, the paths and the trails, they just no longer felt safe, and everything had a weird stillness or quiet about it. But we no longer heard birds or bugs, and it never felt safe there again. We were 16 at the time that this happened, and I've long since moved from that village. I went off to college, in fact, living in a suburb and then to a large city, and I'm actually packing up to move out of state entirely. The house that I'm leaving is near a lake, and packing up my life has meant keeping some odd hours. And for the first time in, well, years, I found myself up at night and moving boxes into the garage. I stopped and I took a look at the lake on my way back to the house, but I froze because I could have sworn that I saw that same woman crawling on her belly, dragging herself up the side of the lake through the mud that sat on the edge. In an instant, she was gone, and I don't know what I saw, but it was creepy enough that I rushed back into the house instantly. I'm not sure what this means, but my aunt is coming to sage the house and our things after this. She's also insisting on doing it for our new place before we move anything in, and to be honest, I think I'm going to let her. I wanted to tell my best friend about all of this, but unfortunately, she passed away a few years ago, and, well, that's another story entirely. I can remember every single detail of this happening, even though I was only 7 years old. We'd moved to a new house that was a split plan, so my parents felt very far away, but I woke up in the night and couldn't go back to sleep, and started feeling scared for, well, no reason really. I got up out of bed and walked towards my sister's room. I heard some sort of soft noise from my bedroom and turned around to look. My parents had left the hall light on, and I could see my entire bed from the hallway. As I watched, the top sheet of the bed slowly started to slide upwards towards the pillow, almost as if someone was making the bed in sort of slow motion. Then suddenly the sheets jerked down to the bottom of the bed, and then up over the pillow again, and down and then up very quickly. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears, and I was so scared that I couldn't move. I wanted to call out to my sister, but I couldn't get her name out. I can see the light turquoise sheets. I can picture the way my pillow was laying. I can feel the air on my arm standing up. Every detail. Ultimately, even though I couldn't yell her name, I eventually managed to push out some sort of gargling wail of terror, and my sister, she came running out to the hallway. She told me that I'd probably imagined it. Older siblings, am I right? And to go back to bed. Instead, though, I crept into my parents' room and slept on the floor next to their bed. I also slept with my light on in my room for a long time after that. This happened in the late summer of 2014, but I remember it clearly, even 10 years later. In the fall of the previous year, I moved into an apartment with my boyfriend at the time. I was freshly 18 and he was 22, He was a socially inept groomer, but let's call him Mike. Mike was always emotionally distant and strange. We had many shared interests, but he refused to let me have friends, make new friends, or just go out and enjoy life in the city. I'd invite him to concerts for bands that he liked, and he'd decline. I'd offer to introduce him to my friends. He'd decline. I'd go out to a show with my friends or go hang out with my friends, and he'd send me a Word document, a deranged poetic slide describing every single fault of mine that he could discern. One time I smoked a little bit of pot, and he compared me to Medea killing her children. When I say poetic, I mean poetic too. And when I say deranged, I mean deranged. Naturally, we broke up too. A friend of mine found him on a dating website, and, well, that was that. My parents helped me lug his stuff into a truck and took him and all of his stuff to his parents' house. Done deal. I kept the apartment and I tried to settle back in. It was fine. I enjoyed my alone time and was free to have friends visit. Honestly, it seemed pretty ideal. Upon falling asleep on my second night alone, I was quickly woken up by a knock on my door though. I checked the time, maybe 3 or 4 in the morning, and I mean, to heck with that, no thanks. So I tried to drift off again, but the knocking happened again, more rapidly, more aggressively. I kept ignoring it though. I didn't have that many friends, and the friends that I did have wouldn't be hanging on my door at 3 a.m. And eventually, that banging stopped. I enjoyed my next few days. I went out with friends, I had some drinks, came home alone, and I went to sleep. 4 a.m. again, and there's that banging. But this time, also some rattling. When I heard that, I realized that the guy was clearly trying to open the door. Luckily, this building was old and disgusting. Landlord paint jobs, roaches, and no AC, but what it did have was 2 deadbolts and a door chain, so I felt more curious than scared, I suppose. I took a look through the peephole and I saw a blonde man. He didn't look like a junkie or a weirdo, but I also didn't recognize him. And no, it wasn't Mike. He was dark-haired and would have written a poem before he tried to break down a door, but feeling young, stupid, and for whatever reason, safe enough to sleep, I just go back and I fall asleep. But this keeps happening. Every single night I go to sleep. Every single night he would knock. He bangs and slams at the door. He jiggles the doorknob left and right. He yanks at the doorknob. He flies into the door with the weight of his entire body, but he never talks. And for some reason, I never called the cops too. I think I was in my ACAB era, I don't know, but it went on for about a week, but I do call my friend Pete eventually. Pete and I hung out for the day. Maybe a bit of context here too is that Pete, he looked like the sniper in Saving Private Ryan. Skinny, bony, oddly serious. Pete couldn't hurt a fly, but he had a weird ghoulish face that made it seem as though he could. So we waited, and waited. We plotted and we constructed a plan. Speaking in whispers, we waited into the night. 12, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, then 3. And sure enough, there was knocking at the door. Go time. Out the peephole, we see the blonde man. What a surprise, right? He continues to knock, smash and bang on the door. With the chain lock on, we undid the 2 deadbolts. The knocking paused. We flick open the doorknob and, with a knife in each of our hands, scream at him. We stab stupid IKEA kitchen knives through the gap. We yell, "We're going to kill you, come back here and we're going to cut you," and we swish the blades around like pirates who are only allowed to carry butter knives. The blonde man, he sort of stumbles back and jogs down the hall. Pete and I laugh it off, and to my surprise, the blonde man never returned. All it took was matching his crazy, I suppose, but I will never know why he targeted me, or why he was so insistent in getting into my apartment of all places. Though I can guess, I suppose, and my guess is that he may have been stalking me for some time, and when he noticed that Mike was gone, Maybe he saw that as his chance. Again, I guess I'll never really know, but when I think back on it, it was kind of a crazy time for me, and honestly, I'm glad it's over. When I was 7, my family, mum and 2 older brothers, 13 and 15, moved house. We moved to a street that was built on old tram tracks from around the 1900s. The line of terrace properties themselves were fairly new, but when we moved in, they were only around 15 years old max. All of the properties have a rear garden that was divided by a meter-tall wooden fence. Each garden has a shared rear wall that is 7 foot tall and made of concrete. This wall separates the properties from the grounds of the local park. So as a kid, I kept myself pretty much entertained all the time. The age gap between my brothers and I at that age was enough to be left out of most things, and my parents were recently divorced. So I would make up games and act out imaginary scenes. It was not uncommon to find me playing off by myself in the back garden. We had pet rabbits that lived in a hutch that was up against the back wall mentioned earlier. Being the curious child that I was, I used to like to sort of stand on the hutch and look over the wall into the park and people watch. I remember it being a warm night, and the sun was setting a bit later in the day. I don't remember the time exactly, but with the way the daylight plays in my memory, it must have been around 7 p.m. I was out in the garden, people watching from my rabbit hutch vantage point, when I had the sudden urge to look over my right shoulder. With the way my house is laid out, the kitchen is at the rear of the house. If I were to enter the house, I'd open and walk through that kitchen. My neighbor's house, which would be on my right side as I looked back, is a bit different. Their sitting room is at the rear instead. So I look over my right shoulder and my neighbor's back door is open. There are no lights on, so it's dark in the sitting room and I can't really make anything out. But I know that they have a sofa facing out, and it would be where I was looking. That's when I see what look like 2 red dots, spaced apart, and not changing distance from one another, floating in the middle of this black room. I remember squinting, trying to figure out, what am I seeing? I kid you not as well. These 2 dots move in a smooth arc to the right and upwards, as if they were eyes on a face of someone standing up from the sofa. As they move, they seem to get a bit closer to the door, and I could make really nothing out except for, well, a dark silhouette. I freak out at that, and I run back inside, all the way to the front of the house where our sitting room is located, to tell my mum. She assures me that it's nothing, and so I head back outside. I climb back onto the rabbit hutch and immediately look behind me again. The figure with its red eyes is now standing in the doorway of their house, looking out into the garden. I nope once more back into the house, and this time, I do not go back outside. For years, I forgot about this experience, but I've always been afraid of the dark. I especially hate looking out of windows at night, particularly into the back garden. Something jogged my memory of it a few years ago, though, and every time I talk about it, honestly, it makes me sort of teary-eyed, because it was terrifying. I still remember every detail of that evening, and I wonder what it was that I saw. My neighbors still live there, and I'm too scared to ask them if they've experienced anything, or if they have an explanation for, well, whatever it was that I saw. At first, I was always too scared to tell anyone this story, and then when I did tell people, they always laughed at me. I really have no reason to make this up. I wasn't on drugs, and no, I'm not psychotic or anything. Back in the fall of 2017, I started my freshman year at Michigan State University. There's a trail behind some dorms, collectively called River Trail dorms because of their proximity to the Red Cedar River and the woods. The trail is colloquially called the Rape Trail because you enter it through a gap in a fence and it can be known for some unsavory activity at night. I had never heard of an assumed happening there while I was there. Mainly it was just where kids went to smoke some weed and cigarettes, really. Well, I had become friends with a couple of boys, and one day after dark, they decided to go to the trail and smoke some weed, and I joined. I never smoked with them as I got obviously interrupted, but nevertheless, I sincerely do not believe that marijuana has anything to do with this story. Anyway, the boys were doing their thing when a figure walked into the open gap into the gate. We were at least 50 feet from this gap and the only people on the trail. It was probably close to 10 p.m. and besides the moon, the only lighting came big parking lot lights close to the gate opening. At first, the boys I was with said that the figure resembled a Korean international student that they knew. I had never met him, so I relaxed a little thinking everything was fine and this person was a friend. Well, they're calling out his name, but he never looks over at us, and he goes off the trail path into the sticks and leaves, but it doesn't make a sound. They're still calling for him, and I'm confused why he's acting so bizarre. I can sense the boys tensing up at this stage too. This is the only way that I can describe what happened next, but the boy morphed into a very tall, at least 7 feet, completely pitch black, featureless, clothless, not even human figure. It was human-shaped, I suppose, extremely skinny, but reflected no light and seemed almost two-dimensional. The figure looked at us dead on, though it was maybe 50 feet away. It moved toward us effortlessly in about 2 strides like it was floating. It came up to us almost head-on and still had no features, no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just all black. Then, when it was so close that I could almost touch it, it morphed into the international student, back down to a probably 5'6" human male. The boys were extremely apprehensive and feigned normalcy, but were probably just playing it cool. I asked him questions and he lit a cigarette, but I can't recall him speaking or answering anything, just sitting there, smoking. We eventually excused ourselves and pretty much ran back to our dorm. I was not the first person to speak. It was my friend who asked, "Did we just see Slenderman?" I said yes, and let's not talk about it anymore. The other kid was speechless and said nothing, and really, we never spoke about it ever again. Eventually, we all drifted apart within the semester, and I haven't spoken with them since 2018. I truly thought that this was the end, that I was going to die that night. To this day, I have never been more terrified too. It was to the point that I almost don't fear humans at all, and the only thing that makes me scared is paranormal stuff now. I don't go into the woods very much anymore too, only ever in broad daylight, and even then not so much. I have a deep respect for nature, and I know that the woods are just not my territory, especially at night. I still have no idea what you would categorize this as. I mean, I've called it a skinwalker, but I'm really not sure that that's accurate at all. Obviously, Slenderman isn't real, but minus the suit, it was kind of dead on, to be honest. I don't know. If people could provide more information, then I would like to learn more, and I can't be the only one who has ever seen something like this. The location opened in 1878 and was originally known as the Eastern Michigan Asylum for the Insane. In 1911, it became known as the Pontiac State Hospital, then was renamed again in 1973 as the Clinton Valley Center. It ultimately closed in 1997, with all but one of the structures being torn down in 2000. When it first opened its doors, the Eastern Michigan Asylum for the Insane treated 222 patients, alleviating overcrowding from the psychiatric hospital in Kalamazoo. It grew over the years, having many additions and extra buildings constructed on the grounds. It reached its peak of operations in the 1950s as the Pontiac State Hospital, with approximately 3,100 patients residing within. By the 1970s, that number had declined to roughly 800. When it closed as the Clinton Valley Center in 1997, there were only 200 patients left, even less than when it had opened as a much smaller location over a century ago. The last remaining structure was seemingly a children's unit, given the presence of a playground outside and classrooms, a gymnasium, and a pool inside. Other than the individual cell-like rooms, it seemed to be structured much like a school too. Most of my experiences on the grounds happened in this building between the years of 2007 and 2017. I believe it was sometime between 2017 and 2020 that it was torn down, but this is the last piece of info that I can't seem to find anything on to confirm. As a side note, a memorial for patients who died and were never claimed by family members stands at the Oak Hill Cemetery just down the road in downtown Pontiac. The names listed on the memorial have death dates ranging from 1880 to 1962. Some places on the list are left blank, seeming to suggest that some sort of names, and the exact dates of their deaths, have been forgotten and/or lost to time. Now, the first time that I went to Clinton Valley Center, or rather the last building still standing, it was as a let's go do some urbex stuff situation, fueled by teenage stupidity. Our collective knowledge about urban exploration was minimal at best. However, old asylums surrounded by neighborhoods, strip malls, and open fields seemed the safer option compared to abandoned buildings downtown that are known to have drug addicts and gang members passing through. We didn't take the paranormal into account at all. Our first couple of visits, there wasn't much that happened really, other than a few feelings of being watched, I suppose. But on the third or fourth visit, some of us, myself included, began to catch glimpses of movement at the edges of our vision. There was never any color to them, just sort of flickers of shadowy figures peeking around corners or darting across doorways. We saw these shadows in a lot of places, but mainly in the corridors, the areas that would have had the most traffic day to day. The administrative offices also had quite a bit of shadow activity too. Sometime after the first shadow sightings, some of us also began to hear whispers. It was never anything clear enough to pick any words out of, but still, it had the distinctive sound of human speech. By the pitch, it also sounded like children, I would guess. I seemed to be the one affected most by this, as I could hear multiple whispers coming from the administrative offices the first time that we went into that wing anyway. That's actually the reason that I never went in there too. Hearing those whispers, it filled me with a sense of dread so visceral that I just couldn't bring myself to go anywhere near that part of the building, even though others in our group went in with nothing to report back about. There was another time, though, that we found the entrance to the boiler room open. It was a large room with the door opening to a landing that then had a walkway of metal grating wrapping around the middle of the room, which was occupied by a giant mass of pipes and machinery. There were stairs going up from the landing to an upper walkway, as well as a door to the roof, while another set of stairs to the right of the landing that went down to the floor of the boiler room. A smaller room off to the side on this basement level opened out into a concrete-walled pit outside the building, with a metal grate hatch over the top of it. My guess is to get machine parts in and out without disturbing the patients. That small room also had access to a long, dark maintenance tunnel that ran under at least one of the corridors. It was small, the bottom of it being about 3 feet above the basement floor, forcing one to either crouch or crawl if they were to go in. Our phone lights, and even a stronger flashlight, the one time that we brought one, couldn't reach the end of that tunnel though. It was like the darkness sort of had substance to it. Staring into it too long gave some of us the urge to crawl in as well, which was weird. We avoided the basement level after that visit. A couple of weeks after our short delve into the basement, though, I was on a walk through the fields near the building, which led me to feeling compelled to enter it by myself. I had packed a small lunch with me and sat down in the central courtyard to have a bit of a picnic. Yes, I know that entering an abandoned place alone was really a bad idea, and that even if there wasn't a known paranormal aspect to the location. But again, I felt compelled to do so, and previous visits to the location had probably led me to believe that I knew the safe zones within the building. Well, while I was eating my lunch, I suddenly heard voices, more like adults and much louder than the childlike whispers I had heard before in the corridor that I was facing. I still couldn't make out what they were saying, but it sounded like they were directly in front of me, having a regular conversation as they walked down the hallway. The windows, they were busted out, so really I should have had a clear view of whoever it was as they walked by. I even heard glass from the broken windows crunching on the floor at one point, but I never saw a single person there. After that, though, I left quickly and quietly. Following my experiences with the disembodied voices and footsteps, my friends decided that we should go and check things out again. At first, the place was as silent as the first few times that we'd visited. As we passed by the boiler room, somebody mentioned that we'd never actually been up to the roof. Figuring that since we were already next to the stairs, we entered the boiler room and we headed up, finding the roof access door to be unlocked. The section of roof this led to was only for the area above the boiler room, so we couldn't walk very far. However, one of the walls of the boiler room formed part of the enclosure of a second courtyard, one that we'd never seen before. One of the other walls was also windowless like that of the boiler room, but the two remaining walls with windows belonged to sections that we had never been to. From up on the roof, we could see that the wall opposite the boiler room was part of a hallway. From previous visits to the area where the doors to that hallway were, we knew that it was inaccessible, the doors to it being locked. However, the last wall was lined with windows into some of the patient rooms. Most of them were boarded up, but a couple near the unexplored hallway were unblocked. With nothing else going on, we decided to enter that section of the building. From previous visits, we knew that area was very dark. It seemed the only light entering it was through the windows of those two rooms and through the entrance to the ward itself. And yes, ward, because unlike the rest of the building, where patient rooms lined the corridors, this area seemed to be more like an actual hospital area. There was a sitting area where we entered, with a nurse's station in the middle. There was a hallway lined with doors to the patient rooms going back from either side of the nurse's station. Another hallway ran between the two at the far end of the ward. Between these hallways and the nurse's station was what looked to be a supply room, I would guess. In any case, we entered the ward and walked through the sitting area and down the hallway that ran alongside the courtyard. Next to the two rooms with missing windows, we found an unlocked set of doors that led into the hallway that had been blocked at the other end. We entered into the room nearest those doors, and some of the guys began talking about hopping out the window and into the courtyard, as there didn't seem to be any actual doors leading out to it. There was also an argument about the windows being just high enough that whoever went out there might not be able to climb back in. As this conversation was happening, me and one of my friends were standing near the door when we heard the distinct sound of crunching footsteps over the glass littering the sitting area. We quickly hushed the other guys and slowly closed the door, having enough presence of mind to make it look like the wind had caught it in case somebody else really was in the building with us. We all heard the footsteps continuing to walk across the sitting area and down the hallway, following our exact path before turning into the room next to us, and then closing the door. We heard more footsteps from inside the room, and then complete silence. We kept completely quiet for like several minutes, during which we heard no other sounds. Eventually, one of the guys who had been talking about hopping out the window and into the courtyard volunteered to sit on the windowsill and lean out to try and peek into that room. With a couple of others holding his arm to anchor him, he looked into the neighboring room and saw, well, nothing. There was no one there. Even though we all heard the footsteps, there was only an empty room behind that closed door. Figuring that was enough strangeness for one day, we unanimously decided to leave at this point. We first carefully peeked into the hallway to make sure that we hadn't misheard the footsteps in the room next to us, to be certain that no one was lurking in the darkness of the ward, and with the coast seemingly clear, we began to head toward the exit as quietly as we could. Those of us bringing up the rear turned to look back as we entered the sitting area, and that was when the door to the other room suddenly flew open and slammed against the wall. The rest of the group also turned back at this point, and then that was when we heard footsteps running toward us. Before we knew it, we were outside the ward standing near the missing door that led to the parking lot. Those of us near the back had stopped because we noticed the footsteps had ground to a halt just at the entrance of the ward. There was plenty of light there, but still, no one to be seen. Whatever it was, we speculated, seemed to be bound to that ward. As our group left, we swore to never go to that part of the building again, and a light-hearted comment was made about how we seemed to be labeling more and more of the place off-limits because of all the paranormal happenings. It was our next visit, though, that would be the last time that any of us would ever set foot in that place again. It was at least a couple of months before anyone talked about the building again after this experience, much less going back. When we finally did go back, no one really felt up to exploring the place anymore. I mean, after all, we had pretty much been everywhere by that point. We'd seen the classrooms, the gymnasium, the pool and its attached shower rooms, the restrooms, the kitchen, the administrative offices. We'd been to the patient rooms and the hospital-like ward. We went to those courtyards, the boiler room, the rooftop and the basement. Really, the only place that we hadn't explored was the tunnel or tunnels under the building. But we'd rejected that idea along with ever going into the basement ever again. The ramp-up in activity with each of our visits also played a part in this, even if most of us wouldn't admit it. In the end, the only reason that we decided to go back into the building was to prank another group of friends. The plan was that we'd enter through the missing door, the same one next to the dark ward that we'd been chased out of the previous time, and turn right into one of the normal hallways lined in the patient rooms. The room right next to that door had its window busted out, but the bushes out front were so overgrown that we could easily hide in the room and see what was happening out in the parking lot. We'd text the other group to meet us inside the building, then jump out of the room to scare them. You know, just stupid teenage shenanigans. Well, the door to the room, very metal and very heavy by the way, naturally swung into an open position, so me and a couple of the other guys took turns leaning against it to keep it shut. The three of us all went still at the same moment, then gave each other the looks that simultaneously asked, "Did you hear that too?" and confirmed that they did hear it. We heard two voices, a little boy and a little girl, whispering and giggling to each other out in the hallway, right on the other side of the door. As we were about to tell the others, the other group showed up though, and called out to us, saying that they had seen one of us in the window, and they weren't going to fall for any of the scare pranks that we had planned. With the cat out of the bag now, a couple of the guys decided to just jump out of the window and move out between the wall and the bushes. Another guy stepped past me and reached out for the doorknob. As soon as his hand touched it, every hair on my body stood on end though, and I instinctively shoved him out of the way. The door flew open and slammed against the wall, almost hitting one of the other guys. The next thing that I knew, the tips of my toes were barely touching the ground as I was flung backward 5 feet and pinned to a wall, my airway completely blocked off. In the chaos that followed, half of the guys clambered over one another as they leapt out of the window and into the bushes, while the other half bolted out the door around the corner and out of the door into the parking lot. Only the other 2 who had heard the voices with me stayed, rushing to grab my arms and pull me from the wall. They had to drag me outside, and it was only once that I was over the threshold that I could breathe again. They said that when I got flung back, I had turned deathly pale, and my color only started to come back once I was outside and able to breathe again. We beat a hasty retreat after that, or as hasty as possible with me needing help walking across the parking lot. It was only after we had left the grounds that I fully regained my color, strength, and ability to breathe again. However, as we began walking back to the nearest of the friends' group's houses, I had periodic episodes where I'd turn pale again and begin dry heaving too. Nothing ever came out, but my shadow told a different story. You see, a barely visible shadow, like the way a brighter light can cast the shadow of a flame, came out of my shadow's mouth and pulled on the ground. I don't know what that was. Ectoplasm? But it was only visible from my shadow, never my physical body, which was absolutely bizarre. And as you can imagine, after that, we never went back to the building. Although, we did return to the grounds a few more times over the following years, mostly as a shortcut to the fields and small patches of woods beyond. Now, perhaps not too surprisingly, the fields and the woods near the children's building were also once part of the grounds of the original asylum. That would probably explain the strange occurrences that happened in those areas too, although nothing quite like what happened in the building. There was a large section of fields that was relatively flat. From a map I've seen of the original asylum's buildings, that flat section was where the back half of the main complex had stood. The grass there was left to grow wild, often flattening naturally from wind and the changing seasons. There were also a few small clusters of trees that had sprouted up too. On a few occasions, me and some of my friends would see a dark figure in the distance, either sort of crouch down in a tall clump of grass or step behind a group of trees. We'd never see them come out of hiding, and it was only after we'd passed by and noticed that no one was there that we recognized the figures as shadow people. In one of the wooded areas, there were some concrete structures too, seemingly the foundations of a few small buildings, at what was once the edge of the grounds, I think. There were no traces of any of the walls, but we always guessed that there were maybe housing and or storage areas for the groundskeepers. This would also possibly fit with the flat-topped ridge that cut through the woods, with a fairly flat path curving across the fields to where the asylum once stood. The ridge, it had some old train tracks half buried on top of it, but the rest of the tracks leading to the asylum had either been removed or fully swallowed by the ground at this stage. With a train yard just on the other side of the creek from that ridge, it seems like it may have been used to transport things like coal and supplies to the asylum. Anyway, the area the concrete structures were in was heavily overgrown. Trees and branches had fallen over the years and undergrowth had sprouted up all around, sometimes even within the foundations, if the concrete had cracked enough for a seed to take root. There was also always a sense that we shouldn't stand on those foundations. The one time a small group of us did, the woods suddenly got very quiet, eerily so, and it felt like we were standing in a small room crammed full of people. We quickly got off the concrete, but the woods stayed silent until we left that day, and it felt like we were being watched the whole time too. Now, although this was in Pontiac, technically part of the greater Detroit metropolitan area, it was also a stone's throw from Waterford and other towns that quickly transitioned from urban streets to suburban neighborhoods to rural farms, forests, and fields. So, there was plenty of wildlife in the area, including deer. However, no larger predators, at least not around the asylum, Not even stray or feral dogs. Animal control was pretty good about that here. With that being said, it was very odd to be walking through waist-high grass and suddenly find ourselves in a flattened circle with no other trails leading in or out. It was even stranger to find the front half of a completely clean deer skeleton in the middle of the circle. It was just an antlered skull, 2 legs ending in the hooves, and a rib cage. The rest of it was nowhere to be seen, even when we looked around the area. Maybe there's a rational explanation for it, I get that. I mean, other than the way that we found the bones being odd, there was nothing supernatural that occurred while we were there or anything. However, given that it was on the former grounds of the asylum and seemingly had no reason for being there, I figured that I should include this. Well, following the demolition of most of the asylum structures in the year 2000, a neighborhood was constructed where the front half of the asylum's buildings had been. Considering my personal experiences in the children's building and the former grounds, it really makes me wonder if any of the homes experienced anything supernatural. A group of local government officers stands in front of the neighborhood on what was once the asylum's front lawn. The MDOT Oakland Transportation Service Center was built on a back road behind where the children's units had been. Between the time that I had moved away from the area, around the beginning of 2017, and the pandemic around the end of 2019, the children's unit was also finally torn down. It was now a flat field, much like where the back half of the asylum's main cluster of buildings had stood. In more recent years, that larger area of fields has seen the construction of 2 new locations. One, fairly close to where the children's unit once stood, is Haven, a shelter for mothers and their children. Given that there's a playground outside and children living there, I can't help but feel it's a little too similar and too close to where the other buildings used to be. The other new location is a FedEx freight center. It primarily occupies an area that used to be just a field on the grounds surrounding the asylum, an area where my friends and I never really experienced anything paranormal. The last remaining section of fields and woods, the area where the concrete structures sit next to the ridge with the train tracks, and where we found the skeleton of a half deer in the tall grass, has remained mostly unaltered. There are now clearly defined dirt tracks weaving around the field, seeming to suggest that it's become the preferred riding spot for 4-wheelers and dirt bikes. I will never forget my experiences from this location. It's something that has stuck with all of us, in fact. And, like I said, I do wonder if any of these people that are living here have experienced anything like what we did. So when I was a kid, I used to be terribly afraid of the dark. I would have to sleep with the closet light on and the bedroom door open to the living room where my mum would be watching TV late into the night. My bed, it was situated in the room where my head was to the wall in the back corner of the room, looking directly out of the door and into the living room. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night. The closet light was still on and the living room light was off because my mum had gone to bed. Everything was dead silent, and I looked out the door to the living room where I saw a silhouette just beyond the reach of the closet light. It was human-shaped, looked male, was tall, I would say about 6.5 feet or so, and wearing a bowler-type hat. For what felt like hours, I just sat there staring at it, and it never moved. I eventually meekly called out to it, asking who was there, but got no reply. Looking back, if it had been an intruder, that would have been a bad idea, but after this, I reached over to my bookcase and grabbed a light, keeping my eyes on the shape the entire time. I flicked on the flashlight, and there was nothing there, just the living room. After a bit of time, I got up and walked into the living room and began searching the house. Again, if it were an intruder, I would have been in a lot of trouble, but my search, it came up empty. The basement door was still latched shut, and the attic door is behind that as well, so nobody was down there. The bathroom, the living room, the kitchen, parents' room, cat's room, both hallway closets, brother's room, and no tall man with a hat. At this point, I was convinced that I had just been seeing things, and I went back into the living room where I looked in the direction of where I would have been looking to see the shape, but there was nothing that could have made that shape, just the coffee table and an armchair in that strip of sight. I went back to bed eventually, and when I laid down and shut off the flashlight, I looked out and didn't see the shape this time. And I have had a thing about being uncomfortable with open doors ever since then. This, though, is not where it ended. I had never told anyone about this encounter for years afterward. However, one day my mum and I were talking in the car, and she mentioned that like a year or two after I had seen this shape, my brother had been really sick with a high fever, and she had been taking care of him when I asked her who the guy in the hallway with the hat was. But when she looked, she didn't see anything. This immediately raised some alarm bells because, like I said, I didn't tell anyone about seeing it. Also, ever since I saw this man's shape just outside of my doorway, when I go through the living room, I get this deep, unshakable feeling that I'm being watched, and the longer that I stay in there, the closer it gets. The feeling immediately goes away when I get far enough down the hallway or into my bedroom, and it only ever happens really late at night, at around 2 to 5 in the morning. Now, there is one last thing that happened in relation to this, besides still getting the feeling of being watched every night, that I had to go to the kitchen or the bathroom. I started a job, and I was at work when a clearly disturbed man came into the store. He seemed to be in deep conversation with someone who wasn't there, referring to the person who wasn't there as Alex during the one-sided conversation. As he was passing by me, he stopped though, and looked behind me and up and said to me, "Who's your friend? I love his hat," before he just continued walking, and that absolutely chilled me to the bone. I do sometimes get this feeling just out and about that I'm being watched for a few seconds and get really creeped out, so it makes me wonder if this shape follows me outside the house sometimes. It would be easy to just dismiss what he said since he clearly wasn't all there, but it was really specific how he mentioned the hat and looked up as if he were looking at someone taller than me. My pops needed a partner to go on a bow hunt with since his hunting buddy got a tag somewhere else. He's been hunting for the better part of like 40 years now, so I couldn't let him go alone, and so we packed up to hunt in the Toyabe National Forest near Kingston in the Arctone Wilderness area. This particular spot that we decided to scout was located north of Kingston called Weeks Canyon. It's mostly rugged, high Sierra desert, but this spot has a creek running from way up high, and we figured if the deer would come to drink, then that would be a good place to go naturally. So we set up camp at the entrance to the canyon, and there's bugs, birds, bees, all sorts of wildlife just bustling around. Lots of dense green bush all over, and some big junipers sprouted all over too. We came up and head up the canyon to see if we can find any sign. About 1.5 miles in though, my pop stops and is dead silent. He whispers to me, "Do you hear anything?" I pause, holding my breath, and listen, but nothing. So I tell him that. "Nah, Dad, I got nothing." He responds and says, "Exactly. There's no birds, no squirrels, no chipmunks. Son, there's not even insects here." Then it hits me. The place is living, but like dead. The wild berries that the plants grow were fully ripened, most so ripe that they fell off and rotted. The trails were untouched, no tracks of any kind, only our boot prints leading to that point. We figured it's just an anomaly or pressure from other hunters, but we pressed on for about maybe another half a mile, turned around and saw nothing at all. That afternoon at camp, we were finishing up dinner, and then over 100 birds just flew in from the valley below and landed in the bush near our camp. No one had gone into the canyon, so that was pretty odd behavior for them. After discussing this and some general uneasiness, we eventually went to bed. I was plagued by the oddest dreams that night too. None that I can recollect, but I awoke at 4ish as we were headed out to do some morning scouting. My dad steps out to pee. Then when he came back, I did the same. And I cannot explain to you the feeling that I had, but I'm going to try. There were eyes on me, and they were not small. I could feel them all over, but only from one source. I was whipping my head back and forth, and my mind was in such a fight-or-flight mode that I forgot that I was even using the bathroom. I hastily went back into the tent, sat down without saying a word, and my dad said, "You feel it too, huh?" I told him, "Yeah, something's out there, man." And my dad interrupted saying, "It's not normal like this." And to hear that come out of my dad's mouth really got under my skin. All these years hunting and mining in remote places, and he's never been spooked like this. We stayed in the tent until some more natural light came out of the sky. We hopped in the car and we scouted elsewhere that morning. I keep racking my brain about it though, and I was thinking, maybe it's just a mountain lion, but I've been in some bad situations before. I used to work in a prison and did a tour overseas even. I've even had the feeling of being stalked, but this one shot straight into my soul. I just cannot shake the unnatural of it all. Water, but no wildlife. Birds leaving the water source to reside in a desert flat. And mostly, the feeling of whatever that thing was that came to observe us. Maybe I'm just hyping it up because I'm mostly a city boy, but again, the way my pops reacted, I don't know, he's been out in these sorts of places millions of times, and to see him like that, it says to me that I wasn't imagining it. So I've just gotten home from my night shift and have just had the craziest night of my life. I work in an aircraft hangar that was built in the late 40s at a well-known airport in the UK. It is well known by many people around the airport that lots of strange things have happened in this hangar, including people running out of the hangar in the early hours of the morning and refusing to work a night shift there ever again. Well, I had an experience myself a year ago whilst it was undergoing refurbishment. I was the only person in the hangar, and whilst getting some things ready for an aircraft, I heard 3 knocks on a door that connected to a fire escape from the room that I was in. For some reason, I assumed that someone was playing a prank, and I knocked back on the door. A minute later, I heard it again, and instantly shivers ran down my spine. I ran out of the room, looked in the fire escape, and nobody was there. I sprinted out of the hangar as fast as I could, and I didn't go back that day. Multiple other people who worked in there have had experiences like seeing black figures and hearing noises. Now, I only found this out a couple of days ago, but sadly, somebody took their life in the hangar. He went to the top floor of the rooms at the back of the hangar and hung himself from the ceiling rafters, unfortunately. On the last set of shifts, I was on holiday, but my colleagues went exploring around the hangar with a couple of guys from another company that works here, and they found a chair, a noose, and a large cross on the top floor of the rooms that look over the hangar. The top floor just has a railing looking over the building. All abandoned rooms that nobody goes in, but there was also writing on the metal rafters that said the name of the person who passed away and the date that he died too. Everyone was stunned and blaming each other, saying that they must have put it up there and it was a horrible, sick prank. That was when they heard a massive bang and they all ran out. As tonight was my first night back on shift, the first thing that we did was to go back up to the room because I didn't believe what they were saying and everyone had gone. The chair, the rope, and the cross were nowhere, along with the writing on the metal roofing, but there was something absolutely unbelievable. A handprint in red, almost paint-like, and the letters saying leave. This definitely wasn't here before, and honestly, I still don't believe this because, it's just so ridiculous. It's like a cringe horror movie, right? We heard an almost grunt or angry-sounding noise though, and we left very quickly after that. Later on that night, we got together with the guys from the other company, and were explaining that it had all gone and that the handprint had appeared. They didn't believe us, so we took them up there to show them. I cannot even believe what I saw with my own eyes though, but when we got up there, the door to the room, only one way in, no other entrance, had been barricaded with a piece of metal shelving from the abandoned floor below. Once we got in, the chair, the noose, the cross were all back in that room, now pointed at the doorway. We were all there in disbelief when we heard another bang, and that was when we ran as fast as we could out of there. We then went to the floor below, also abandoned but completely closed with no light. I said about 10 times I really don't think that we should be going and doing this, and that I had a bad feeling when we literally saw an object appear mid-air and crash onto the 30-plus pieces of metal shelving that had been used to block the door upstairs. We all ran out and I tripped on a piece of metal that was left on the floor, nearly breaking my leg. It was all so unbelievable and worrying that, honestly, I sort of hope that someone is playing a dark joke on us. But because of the many people that I've heard horrible stories about this hangar from, I'm really starting to believe that this stuff is real. I enjoy my job, and I certainly don't want to disrespect any spirits who may be there, but I just want to be left alone. So, does anyone have any tips for making sure that it doesn't affect me anymore, and how to deal with things if they happen again? Obviously, they don't want us going to the upper floors, but the experience that I had before was on the ground floor. If I could get some feedback for this, that would be great, as the whole situation has completely blown my mind. My daughter, who is 3, is finally talking to where we can understand most of what she says. We recently bought a house and finished moving in. It's a nice, quiet neighborhood outside of our next door Karen, but that's another story. My sister and my wife said that they heard my daughter talking with someone in her room the other day, though. They heard someone responding to her as well, which was very weird. Upon investigating, there was nobody there, though. I told them that they must have been hearing things and she was just playing and practicing her speech or something. 2 days later, though, I had my first ever case of sleep paralysis. It was about 3 in the morning and I was drifting off to sleep. Shortly before or shortly after I fell asleep, I'm not quite sure, I looked up and felt like I was being laid on. I heard creepy exhaling in my left ear that was really quiet at first and got really loud. I broke myself out of it by screaming babe, but I guess I didn't scream because my wife was still asleep. I've never had that happen even in houses that were confirmed to be haunted, so this was very strange. Anyway, the following morning I walked to my daughter's room because I'm sure it was the same time that she'd been talking to, because the presence was definitely an angry female. I started speaking so as to address the thing. I said that this was my house now and that they aren't welcome here. I said that I will not be held down in my own bed and it will not terrify my daughter or talk to her at all ever again. I said that I'm giving it the option to leave on its own or I would be calling a priest. This was mainly to give respect to it since I believed it was human at one point and I wanted to give it that human option. After I finished speaking, the air felt lighter and nothing happened for a very good while. Fast forward 5 months later, though, to tonight. My daughter has been inconsolably crying in her own room, the new room. We moved her across the house. I'd been checking on her every hour, making sure that she had everything that she needed, and nothing was working. My wife came into the room and started talking to her, and she uttered out that she was scared. When we asked what of, she pointed to the upper corner of her room above her bed and said, "She's so up there." We said, "Who is she?" without an answer. I told her to come to me, face the corner she was pointing at, and tell it to go away. She happily did and turned back to me. I was chatting with my wife about it, and she turned around and said, "Where did she go?" So I repeated the question that she asked me, and she looked around and said, "She's right there," pointing on the ceiling, in between the two corners now directly above her bed. I spoke to what I believe now is someone who might be attached to the house, saying, "I thought we fixed this issue, but I guess I'm going to have to call the priest since you don't want to leave." I told my daughter that if she sees her again, to say go away. We left her bedroom light on and gave her some milk, and that seems to have done the trick to get her to sleep. Now, the reason why I'm here is because I'm wondering if anyone has any advice on what this could be. How would I go about explaining this to a priest, and does this even require a priest? I have so many unanswered questions, but something is scaring my daughter, and I need it to stop. So there's this one time that I was playing with my toys in the basement of my parents' house. I was around 6 years old, so it must have happened in 2011. For context, at this time, the house was not fenced, and it happened a few times that people just walked through my garden to access the field behind my house, so it could seem not unusual, but wait for it. After eating dinner, my parents would let me play with my toys for a little while since it was the Halloween vacation at that point. I can't say for sure what time it was, but it was definitely after 7 p.m. because I remember that it was already very dark outside. While I was playing, I heard a noise coming from, I thought at the time, the boiler room that is behind me. It usually makes noises, so I continued playing without even thinking about it. The door of the boiler room was closed like always. It's always closed because otherwise we can smell the fuel in the whole house. Anyway, I continued serving plastic food to my non-existent clients in my non-existent restaurant. Then I heard another noise. That time I turned around to see what made that noise and where it came from, but nothing. The door of the boiler room was closed like it was supposed to be. I was confused, but didn't worry more than that and continued playing. Until I heard a knock coming from the window facing me. I looked up and there was a man standing there looking at me. The guy had his head between the bars of the window, and still today I could recognize him, even if it did happen 15 years ago. He was wearing his 90s Nike jacket and a faded blue cap. He had a beard of 2 days, and he looked like he was very tired. I remember him having these massive dark circles under his eyes, his expression being neutral when I noticed him. After a few seconds of staring in shock, I ran upstairs to my parents, telling them about what I had just saw. My dad immediately ran down to the basement. He grabbed a hammer and got out ready to attack the guy if needed. But by then, the guy had just disappeared into the darkness. My dad even went to drive around the village that I live in to look for him, but we never did see him again. We believe that he probably ran through the field behind my house. These events, though, honestly traumatized me at that age. I was having a lot of nightmares, dreaming of this almost every night for a while. I had night terrors because of this, and still today I'm pretty terrified when I'm in this basement. It always just gives me the chills and makes me want to run upstairs as quickly as I can. So early this summer, I, male 16, got my driving license for a 50cc moped, common and popular thing here in Europe, and I was really hyped to finally get to ride with my friends and explore places that I couldn't have explored before without my moped. And everything went great for the first couple of days, until one day, me and my friends were just out cruising and having fun. It was a warm and sunny summer evening, so we decided to go ride on some smaller gravel roads on the countryside. We did that, and we were riding there for maybe, an hour, until everyone had to get home but me. It was probably like 1 or 2 in the morning at that point, but I still decided to stay there and just ride around and listen to some music in my headphones. I started riding towards this one small village, surrounded by fields, and there was a lot of farms there too. I rode a bit slower there than usual so there wouldn't be any accidents with all the tractors and farm vehicles. But after I got through the village and closer to a bigger road, the sun was almost gone and it was getting really dark outside. It had been a nice ride, and I decided to start heading home on this almost empty highway, even though the speed limit was like 100 kilometers an hour, and it's not allowed to ride a 50cc moped on the highways, but I did it anyway as there was really no one around. Home was almost 30 kilometers away from where I was at that point, so I was just going full speed in case to get home before my parents found out that I'd been outside until 3 in the morning. But when I'd been riding for like 15 minutes, I saw a car stopped on the side of the road with its lights on, and it had me a little bit creeped out, to be honest. I just pushed it out of my mind though and kept going since I was almost halfway home anyway. But after a few minutes, I noticed the car from earlier speeding up after me, and since I have a moped that only goes like max 80 kilometers an hour, the car caught up to me pretty quickly. And then the car started to pass me, and when it got beside me, I looked in there and I saw a man, but he was covered in blood, and he was looking straight at me with the crazy eyes, if you get what I mean. He was smiling at me, so I got very scared, and he rode alongside me for probably a minute, but man, it felt a lot longer than that, with him just staring at me and looking at the road every once in a while. Then the man raised his other hand, waved me goodbye before putting his finger on his lips and doing the shush thing. After that, he sped off and got off of the highway onto a ramp to a smaller road, and when he did that, I saw that the car didn't even have a license plate. That was a super creepy experience, and I don't know why the man was covered in blood and why he had been parked on the side of an empty road at 3 in the morning. But what I do know for sure is that he's definitely not somebody that I would hope to ever meet again. I would really like to try and find an explanation for these events that happened to me while I was younger. It still sticks in my head to this day and makes me feel anxious for some reason. So while I lived with my mother, she said that she had experienced quite strange things happening in her house, from the kettle turning on randomly, even whenever we got a new kettle, to her just feeling uncomfortable during the night. When I got to about 10, I believe, one night I got up to use the toilet, and I remember seeing a man standing in our hallway, which really scared me. I ended up screaming for my mum to help after running back to my bed. I remember telling her what I saw and her actually believing me, which I think helped me cope a bit. Another time, which this one still scares me the most, it was around the time I was 14. I was in the same house, and it must have been about 6 in the morning. I woke up to a strange feeling, like somebody was watching me from next to my bed. The way my back was facing, I couldn't see though. I slowly turned to see a shadow silhouette standing right next to me, faceless. I didn't make a noise or anything, but I punched where the silhouette was, and then when I released, I just sort of laid back down straight away in a fetal position, because a very strong feeling of like fear and anxiety washed over me. I couldn't move as I thought that it would do something to me. I stayed there like that for about 20 minutes and slowly turned to find it not there anymore. After I moved into my grandparents' house at about 15, I started to feel the same feelings I felt at my mum's about 2 months in. And one night, I heard what sounded like bare feet running to and from my bedroom door to the back outside door. It was a wooden floor and it was quick, like it was running, and then it would just sort of stop dead right outside of my door. Then it would wait for a few seconds and start running again. I texted my grandma asking if she or my grandfather were walking around. Luckily, she normally wakes up to text, so she replied no, and I then said, could you please come down the stairs with our dog and turn the lights on? As soon as she walked out with the dog, though, I could hear my dog barking and then my grandma walking up to the door. And these were completely different footsteps. Weird stuff would happen all the time too, and I always felt like something was watching me. I invited my girlfriend over one time when me and her were like 16, and she stayed the night with me. At about 1, I could hear the footsteps again, so I woke her up and said, "Can you hear that?" Without saying anything, she listened, and then nodded at me yes. We did the same thing and texted my grandma, asking if she was moving about the house, and she said no again. But this time, I got the courage to swing open the door. I guess I was trying to act tough in front of the missus, but when I did this, there was nothing but a cold feeling of like dread. There are 2 more times I had experienced something. One time I was having strange dreams of being tickled in my sleep. I woke up to still be feeling this feeling and started freaking out as I'm awake and feeling somebody tickling my body. I leaned over my bed, not sure why, but I looked at the floor in the pitch dark, when out of nowhere, this strange blast of air, which felt like when you sort of stick your head out the car window at a high speed and you can't hear, hits me in the face. Obviously, I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. The last incident happened, though, when I came back from living in Scotland. Interestingly, too, in Scotland, I had no issues at all. Anyway, I had pulled up to my grandparents' house with my ex-girlfriend, and we were just having a chat in my car. I look in the front window of my grandparents' house, and I see the same shadow silhouette that I saw all those years ago. Once I get into the house after coming in through the back door, I can hear the radio switch on up in the front room. My pop turns it off and says I haven't heard it turn itself on ever before. And really, that's about it. It's been helpful to share this to just get it off my chest, but if you have any answers, I would definitely love to hear them for closure. I have to try and stop thinking about these events that happened to me because they just make me feel a bit crazy and stupid, but anyway, if you have any information about what any of this could have been, then please do share it. My neighbor Tom rents his home and he doesn't seem to work. He just sort of sits on his porch smoking pot most days. We've always kept to ourselves, but when I moved in 3 years ago, he introduced me to his wife, Susie. She didn't say anything and quickly just went back inside. After that, I only ever saw different women coming and going, so I figured Susie was either made up or not really his wife since I never saw her again. But today, for the first time in 3 years, I saw Susie outside. She looked like she hadn't seen sunlight in years. Pale, mentally unwell, and staring at the ground. She might even be disabled, I'm not sure. As I pulled into my driveway, Tom quickly rushed her back inside though. Now, I'm really concerned that she's been kept inside all this time. Am I overreacting, or is this something that I should be worried about? Also, Tom has several vehicles, but only one is ever at the house at a time. A beat-up red Tahoe, a nice truck, a van, and a new silver Tahoe. It changes depending on the day or the week which one he's driving. But I've always found it odd, especially since it seems like he doesn't work, and I initially wondered why Susie never had a vehicle. Anyway, based on some feedback that I got, I decided to call for a wellness check for tomorrow on my way out of town. I've also since investigated a bit more and looked up the license plates on 2 of the 4 vehicles that he rotates out, and neither match the vehicles that they're on. I've spoken with a police officer who's a friend of a friend, and I shared all the details in the background. He's thinking that it will be best to have a cop pull Tom for the license plate the next time that he leaves the neighborhood, and while they're dealing with the mismatched plates, another officer will go to the house to perform a welfare check. I'm now waiting on an official callback to confirm all and take my statements on record, and I'll keep you guys posted about that for sure. But this whole situation, something just doesn't feel right. This happened a few years ago. While I've never been a real skeptic, I guess, I never had an actual personal experience until this point. I could tell a dozen stories from that place, but hands down the scariest experience I've ever had is this. In 2021, I was working as a private investigator for a security firm, but would sometimes be called in to cover security guard posts. I was called in over a long holiday weekend, during which a factory was going to be shut down. I covered night shifts, and during shutdown, everything in the building was powered off. Lights, machines, everything save for things like security cameras, lights in the office, alarms, the boiler, and I think the Wi-Fi too. This was a huge factory. It took roughly an hour and a half to make one round, in fact, and the entire building was pitch black, so in order to do rounds we had mag lights and the cell phone to scan barcodes near the doors to track our movements. We also had to write down the readings from several pressure valves on certain water risers. 2 of the risers were 10 feet apart and behind 2 large pieces of machinery along a back wall. To get the readings, we couldn't hold both the mag light and the cell phone, so we had to use just the cell phone to navigate. On my first round, it had gone fine. No issues, everything secure, all doors are locked, everything accounted for. I had just started my second round and was getting the measurements from the risers. I got the first reading, turned to my left and was getting ready to walk the 10 feet to get the second, when a shadow appeared in front of me. It didn't really have a distinct shape, but was human height, and so black that I could distinguish it from the already pitch black of the factory. Before I could do anything, it flew directly at me, passing through my chest, and it was the most horrid, soul-deep, ice-cold feeling that I've ever had. I instantly collapsed on the floor, and while I don't know how much time had passed, I managed to call my boss at some point. Thankfully, he came and found me, called EMS, and while he obviously thought that I was nuts, this building had a reputation for paranormal activity and negative energy. It had ended the career of more than one guard, allegedly, so he knew something had happened. When EMS came, my vitals were all over the place. My heart rate was 180, while my blood pressure was only 74/40. I was in the hospital for a couple of days. But while I doubt he ever really fully believed me, my boss has seen me handle first responses after a tornado, an active shooter, and even a hostage situation with relative sanity intact. And even he admitted that whatever happened rattled me to my core. I don't know what it was, a demon, a reaper, or just some very angry spirit, but it was not friendly. To this day, just thinking about that experience gives me chills too, makes me sick to my stomach and really puts me on edge. At 32 years old, I still refuse to be in a pitch black room again because of what I experienced that night. First of all, let me start by saying that I'm just some regular guy who thinks that, yeah, spirits are real and I believe in God, but I never think about any of this stuff or am spooked by it either. If I hear a strange noise while sleeping, I ignore it and just carry on. I honestly pay it no mind and go about my days just normally, but something I witnessed about a year ago, it still bothers me until this day, and I randomly think about it from time to time. It was a regular day, and I was driving home at night like I always do. I'm going down a residential street that's about a few blocks from my home. I've driven down that street like maybe 1,000 times or more. Think of a 2-lane street each way, wide street with gated communities on both sides. I want to say it was around 9:30 at night. I was driving home from my son's baseball practice. My son was sleeping in the back seat. I make a right turn into that street, and traffic was a lot lighter than usual. If I recall correctly, it was one car quite far away coming my direction and perhaps 1 or 2 cars in a distance behind me. So as I'm driving down the street, I notice what appears to be a person walking on the sidewalk on my right-hand side. He's walking towards the same direction that I'm driving, so I can only see his backside. And I say his because it had the body frame of a male, as it was tall, lanky, and medium hair that reached its shoulders. He was also wearing something like a black hat, skinny figure, black pants, black shirt. If I had to guess, maybe around 6'4", 6'5". I keep driving, and as I get closer to this person, perhaps around 20 to 25 feet away, I was suddenly completely stunned. This person turned around as it saw my lights approach, but in a very quick and vulgar way, like when somebody calls you over and over, and you turn around and say, "What?" Well, in that kind of way. And let me tell you that whatever it was not human. And no, it was not a mask. If it was a mask, it was more real than what CGI can do in movies nowadays. It was this monster-looking face, alone on a sidewalk in an empty street. It turned around, saw me, and stared at my car as I drove past it. I looked in my rearview mirror, and it had stopped walking and just sort of stared. Immediately, my first reaction and thought to myself, aside from shock, was, "Dear Lord, what did I just witness?" And until this day, I still have no answer for it. So this happened about 5 years back. I was dating a girl who was prone to violent outbursts without warning. Her choice in decor was all dark and twisted paintings, a satanistic Bible as her coffee table book of choice. At times she was a very sweet and loving person, but would switch on a dime to her outbursts. She even once pulled a knife on me, cutting my hand when I tried to take it from her. One night, though, I was staying over. We were laying in bed watching movies and relaxing. I went downstairs to the kitchen to grab a drink from the fridge. The kitchen was dark, just lit up from the light above the stove. I opened the fridge door, reached down to grab my soda. When I stood back up and closed the door, starting to walk back, I was met with a shadow, not on a wall, but rather right in front of me. It was taller than I was. I kind of jumped back in fright, only to have it disappear in front of me. Walking back to the room, I was a bit confused and rattled, I guess. At first, I tried to play it off as my shadow, but the placement was just all wrong, let alone it not being on a wall. I get back into bed clearly shaken, not wanting to say anything. I didn't bring it up. But then she asked me what was wrong, and I said, "Nothing, I just got a bit of a fright." She replied with, "You saw it, didn't you?" I asked her what she meant by that, and in a very calm voice she just said, "The shadow guy." She claimed to have been seeing it most of her life, and it wasn't something to worry about, allegedly. Our relationship lasted 8 months in total, and a number of unexplained things happened in that house. However, that was the only time that I saw something directly. There were other instances of things happening, mostly when we would be fighting and screaming. From the sounds of footsteps coming from upstairs to one time hearing a loud crash from the upstairs bathroom. We went to investigate and found that all the soaps and the shampoo bottles in the shower, that they had found their way onto the floor despite being on tiled shelves. She never seemed worried or upset when these things would happen, which is a bit strange, I know, but still to this day I really question what I saw that night. My children have been talking about seeing something in their room the last few weeks. This thing, they both described it as tall, lanky, grey-skinned with big black beady eyes. They described it as being surprised looking, but it's almost taking on features of people in the house. So, it is hairless, sometimes, but other times has long dark hair like myself. They said it's almost looking like one of the kids in facial structure or their aunt who they look a lot alike. The first time my oldest saw it, she actually saw an arm come out of her closet and wiggle its long fingers, and after it was peeking around the closet at her, when she would look at it, it would duck back in. She's 16, so she was like, "Oh man, I must be tired." But my youngest, she hasn't been told anything so as not to scare her, saw the same thing looking over their door at her. My mum was over and we got into the subjects of ghosts one time, enthusiasts that we are. My oldest daughter brought up seeing something, and before she could even get it out, my younger child was like, "Did it look like this?" and proceeded to describe it in detail, and my oldest said yes. So, I know that they are definitely seeing the same thing, but I honestly haven't the faintest idea of what it could be. I can't tell if it's something bad because, it hasn't really done much besides show itself, but they do hear whispers a lot in there, allegedly. So far, they say that it hasn't been seen outside of their room. It's only ever been seen in there, but I'm determined to get it out. I have to know what I'm dealing with first, obviously, but once I do, I'm going to try and get rid of it. So this may all seem insane or delusional, but I would really love to get someone's feedback on this, a second opinion at least. This entire thing is true, I can assure you that. I've never stopped thinking about it or wondering about this night too. So, in 2021, I moved into the house that I currently live in. I'm renting it. The house was built in the 1950s, from what I can gather through records. All seemed fine when we first moved in, except for the red room. Upstairs, there is a triangular attic-type space, painted completely red. It gave me terrible feelings of dread when I first walked into it. For months and months I left it empty too. I wouldn't venture into it. My mother, who is a Christian but does not believe in ghosts, came to visit the house when we moved in. She walked into that room and said, "Oh my goodness, you should consider having our pastor come see this and pray," because she also got the dreadful feelings. Our bedroom is downstairs below that room, and at night, I would always hear like walking or creeping up there and lay awake sort of scared. But then it all went downhill. You see, as I got into bed one night, I heard an echo or young sort of female type voice whisper my name directly in my left ear. I froze and went completely cold. Waking up my partner in a panic, he shrugged it off. The next night, I heard the same voice, but coming from the next room, saying hi. I tried my best to ignore these things until one of the scariest nights that I've ever had. I was upstairs. My office is directly beside the red room, a door separating them. I was at my vanity taking off my makeup when the red room door slowly opened. Over the months, it would randomly open quite often, scaring me a bit, but my partner just blamed a draft, even though there wasn't one. But I tried to ignore that door. But that was when I heard loud footsteps downstairs walking around through the house. Assuming it was my partner at first, I finished my skincare and came down for bed. The whole house was dark, so I thought, that's weird. I just heard him walking around. I walked into the bathroom to pee, and as I passed the kitchen, I saw a tall, dark shadow-type figure walk past me. I could see it through the light coming through the windows. I assumed it was my partner. I even spoke out loud, saying, "Hey, I'll be in bed in a minute." After the bathroom, I walked to our room. Silent, because he was completely asleep. In a panic, I shook him awake, saying, "How long have you been asleep for? Weren't you walking around earlier and in the kitchen?" Through his sleepy demeanor, he said, "I've been asleep for what?" And he looked at his watch. 2 hours? And rolled back over. I went completely silent and cold again. I turned around to face where the kitchen was, and I saw nobody. But I was completely terrified by now. I quickly climbed into the covers and tried to wake him to tell him that we needed to check the house because somebody was in here. He didn't listen though and said to just go back to sleep. I turned my face and I saw a tall figure standing directly over him beside the bed on his side. At that, I couldn't hold it in anymore, and I let out a massive scream and grabbed him. This made him wake up, confused and asking, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" I cried and said that I just saw a person again over him. And when I said that, he jumped up and checked our whole room, under the bed too. He said that there really isn't nobody here. He's a skeptic, always has been, never was afraid of the house. And well, that all changed once he got back into bed. We laid there, and as I finally started feeling less afraid and drifting to sleep, a loud bang like a stomp on the ground or dropping a brick was heard. The sound came from the floor on his side of the bed, right where I had seen the figure. He immediately was shaken from his sleep and screamed, "Okay, what the heck was that?" I could tell that he was afraid. I'd never actually seen him afraid. I started to panic, saying that I told you there was something there. Crying a little bit now, I really didn't know what to do. He immediately went around checking the entire house, making sure nobody had actually broken in. He got back into bed and I said, "You know that it wasn't a person, right?" He didn't know how to respond. This is all 100% true. It happened early last year in 2023. After this event, we moved our bedroom to another room across the house and turned the old one into a bonus room. Since moving our room, nothing has happened since, which is a bit bizarre. I wondered if the entity or whatever it was feeding off of me easily because I was sleeping directly below that red room. I'm not sure, but since then the only occurrence has been the red room door opening, the doorknob rattling a bit too. I now rebuke whatever it is when this occurs. I'm not the most religious, but I very loudly and firmly let it know that it's not welcome and it needs to leave me alone. So, I'm here to get your thoughts about what all of this could be and what you think that I should do about it. I generally consider myself a paranormal skeptic. I'm not religious and I have a hard time believing in ghosts. However, I like to entertain the idea. I enjoy ghost stories and movies, and I wouldn't rule out the paranormal altogether as an explanation for a situation that otherwise lacks an explanation. And this story falls into the latter category. This took place almost 20 years ago when I was around 15. I'm from a small town in the Midwest filled with plenty of older houses. One weekend, my parents took me with them to an open house at a house across town. It was a massive 2-story farmhouse built in 1840. It was at the very back of its property, maybe 5 acres, and surrounded by mature trees and plants. The land had been somewhat decently maintained, but The house hadn't had anyone living in it for a while. It wasn't dilapidated inside or out, and it could certainly be lived in immediately, but it needed some TLC. Think the house from Ghosts in the UK, but with more Berber carpet. The approach to the house was beautiful though, and had such a neat charm to it. We all really liked it. However, once we were in the house, I just felt, well, strange. This was an open house, so there were probably 4 or 5 other groups of people touring throughout, and despite that, it was just so strangely quiet. We toured all around, starting with the upstairs. There was such an odd vibe up there too. I kept feeling kind of dizzy and claustrophobic, even though it was a huge house. I was ready to leave after the weirdness upstairs, and from seeing the amount of maintenance that we'd have to do as well. But I was along for the ride, so we went down to the main level and looked all around. It felt a lot better down there, and I didn't get as uncomfortable as I did upstairs. Finally though, the real estate agent started funneling everyone down to the basement. The door was in the kitchen, and it led to the kind of basement that you'd probably imagine a house built in 1840 would have. Bare bulb hanging by a thread above the stairs, completely unfinished walls, dirt floor, and stairs that would be perfect to have your ankles grabbed from the other side. You know the ones. Well, we all went down to the basement as a group and looked around a bit. Really not much to see except for cobwebs and old wiring. I admit that it could have been the old horror movie basement influencing my opinion, but I felt super weird down there as well, and was ready to leave. Once everyone had their fill of looking around, we headed back up the stairs to the kitchen. I ended up being the very last person in the group, which meant that I was the last person up the stairs. Since the rest of the group was sort of loitering around in the kitchen, we had to slow down on the stairs so everyone could pass by. And I remember, clear as day, I was standing on the 3rd step from the top, waiting to step into the kitchen and finally get out of this dang basement. When all of a sudden, my hair gets pulled from behind. I had or have short hair, and it felt like someone grabbed the hair right in the middle of my head and gave it a tug. My first thought was maybe I got my hair caught in something on the wall, so I looked all around for the offending object. But the only thing that I could have gotten my hair stuck in was a wall-mounted fire extinguisher, but I know that I was nowhere near it. At that, I made a beeline out of there, soon followed by my parents. When we got in the car, I told them what happened. We've talked about this story every now and then throughout the years, mostly in a wasn't that strange sort of way. It remained my favorite ghost story to tell, mostly since I don't have any other first-hand ones. The property, though, it was later sold to a local restaurateur, who sadly bulldozed a lot of trees and front lawn to build a new Italian restaurant. The house remained intact at the back of the property, and still does to this day. But fast forward around 4 years, I had moved to college and largely forgot about the hair-pulling thing. My mum called me and said that she had just had her mind blown and that she needed to share this. She had gone to a hair appointment with her stylist, and the topic of the Italian restaurant and house came up. She told my mum that there's allegedly an older female spirit that likes to mess with people, especially men, on the steps leading to the basement. She said this too without my mum having ever mentioned my experience to her. She had no idea that I had my hair pulled 4 years earlier. Of course, my mum proceeded to share my story from the open house with her, and I swear chills went down my spine. In fact, I'm getting chills even just sharing this. The house is still standing, and the Italian restaurant is still open as well. Part of me wants to go back to that house, but a much more sensible part of me wants, well, nothing to do with it. Anyway, if you've gotten this far, then thanks for listening. Growing up in rural Alaska, I experienced a lot of weird things, like amazing herds of caribou, strange weather, but The weirdest things to me are the times that I wasn't able to see the source of yelling or hollering. A lot of times I travelled alone throughout the Brooks Range and up into the North Slope to hunt and trap. From a young age, I learned how to hunt and field dress animals too, set up survival shelters, and even how to travel at night with the usage of the constellations like my ancestors before me. But these long and very arduous journeys sometimes brought me more than I was willing to endure. In the winter of 2017, I had a trap line along the left side of the valley headed northbound. A trap was set every few miles, and I was traveling along my trail when I saw a figure in a bunch of diamond willows ahead of me. The bunch of brush was about a mile or so away, but I could see the dark figure walking like a person. I wondered who would be out in January when it's the coldest time of the year just walking like this, when they just suddenly vanished. I looked out of my binoculars and scanned the area and just put it off as my imagination or someone with a snow machine, a snowmobile for you lower 48ers, and they had taken off along my trail or something. So I continued on. At my next trap, I stopped and shut off my machine. It was calm and surprisingly warm, for that time of year anyway, so I was able to shed my parka to reset the spring trap that I had come across. As I set the trap, I then started to hear a low, bellowing noise from up in the small valley. It came off like a person just yelling at first, but then it grew deeper, like a bear warning off another, but it was January. Nothing like that would be out and about. The most that you'd find would be wolves, maybe wolverines and caribou. Even moose tend to travel south for that time of the year. As I started to pack up, the noise began again though. It grew louder and louder, and I remembered that figure that I saw and wondered if they had anything to do with it. But I did my best to ignore the noise like my elders had taught me, and to just go about my business. But then, suddenly, I could feel eyes on me. I looked towards the valley where I felt the weird sensation, and there was nothing. I even pulled out my binoculars and looked, but nothing. I listened for the noise again, and when the bellowing began again, I responded this time. I did the same noise back at it, and it stopped quickly, like it recognized the noise that I made. Then it got eerily silent. I was uneasy, so I packed up and I left as quickly as possible. And I haven't been back there since. I pulled the trapline that winter, and I do not plan on going back. This is not my story, but it actually happened to a friend. He's a metalhead and hangs out mostly with his kind. And when he was in junior high, him and his group of friends thought that it would be funny to do a session, a Ouija board session that is. At first, the answers were kind of random. No one was truly convinced that it was working. One of these guys had a friend, my classmate, who was about to participate in taekwondo tournaments. He was the only one out of the group who knew the name of his friend's rival. He asked what the rival was called, and the board gave a different name. He said, "That's not her," and they took it even less seriously. Then they asked what the entity's name was. My friend doesn't remember the exact answer, but he says it sounded like how you'd expect a demon to be called, something creepy. That happened on a weekend, and after that they ended it. On Monday, though, they went back to school and told their classmate, the one who participated in the tournament, that the Ouija board had given them a wrong name. They said this jokingly, but the classmate told them that the fight was cancelled last minute and wrote on the board the name of her new rival, which coincided with what the board had told them except for one letter. It was a very, very unusual name, one that nobody could have known at the time of the session. They were obviously very shocked by this, but it didn't stop there. It was around this time too that my friend recalls that they all went through some weeks of bad luck. Silly things would happen to all of them, like a black car almost running over one of them in a parking lot and stuff. They naturally didn't tell their families what they had done, but the worst thing happened to the sister of one of them. One evening, he was on his computer, which was under a staircase. His sister was watching TV facing him and the stairs, and this is how he tells it. His sister saw a couple of goat legs slowly walking down the stairs. The roof was blocking the entire view, so she thought maybe her mum was wearing a costume or something. But when the legs reached a certain step, she could see how they lacked an upper body. It was just a pair of black goat-like legs. She screamed and had an anxiety attack, couldn't stop crying. The brother says that he didn't see anything since he was focused on the computer. I personally think that it is not a good idea to use a Ouija board, just to see if the stories are real especially. After hearing this from my friend, I have huge respect for the board, and this regardless of those who have done it without anything happening to them. All my life, I've always been a skeptic for paranormal activity. I've always found a way to logically make sense of these experiences. This home that I've lived in has always had a story to it though. When I was younger, my family told me that the previous owner of the home used to have a daughter, but one morning when she went out back in her yard to swing out on their family's tire swing, well, something bad happened. The story is that the rope had snapped somehow, and the tire had crushed the poor girl. I don't know her age, but I assume that she was probably around 5 to 8 years old. Soon after, the family moved out and the home sat for a good few years before we began living there. This swing to this day is far out from the property and is completely overrun with forest nature, but a rope is still attached to a branch and you can still see it. We had our own tire swing that was also far off from the property, but was much closer than the previous swing. And like her, my younger brother also had an incident. Our own tire swing snapped mysteriously and he broke his arm. After that, we never did fix that swing. As the years went by, there were plenty of incidences that the rest of my family would encounter. My mother and sister saw someone standing inside the house in front of a window while they were outside alone. No one else was home at the time, but my mother shouted out thinking that maybe one of us had arrived or something. When they didn't get a response from, "Hey, when did you get home?" they were puzzled. They really believed it was me they saw, so they assumed that I was in a bad mood and ignored them. They immediately went inside to check up on me, but I wasn't there. In fact, nobody was. My brother woke me up one night because he had heard voices outside. Everyone else was asleep, so he grabbed a shovel and handed me a cane and asked me to check out the outside with him. We searched the area and no one was out there. We do have a few neighbors, but all of their homes are quite a distance to walk. But there would be really no reason to come to our house, let alone around 1 a.m. in the morning. But here's where my own little story happens. Nothing ever really happened to me or when I was around, but my first and maybe last encounter happened this way. Nothing major, but still unexplainable to me, which is pretty big for me to be honest. So a few months ago, we were discussing about some of our worries about the house. My family went on about the tales I had mentioned and also many other that happened over the years. I explained to everyone that maybe they're just buying into the creepy stuff a little too much, and so their brains are leaning towards these experiences being paranormal. They think they saw a shadowy figure walk by every now and then because they're so open to the fact that the house is haunted. They truly believe the house is haunted by a demon or by the devil himself. We went our own ways after breakfast. Everyone in the house had errands of their own to run that day, and I was left alone in the home. I've been home alone plenty of times, and nothing has ever happened. And after everyone left, I went into our garage because I like to store things in there like books and, well, mostly junk that I keep because they have sentimental value. I left the door cracked open because it's a bit hard to close. I'm a bit lazy, so I didn't want to struggle to open it this day and close the door a second time. It's not a lot of effort, but I'm just a bit lazy. For some reason, though, I had the feeling like someone was behind me. I turned around, and the second that I did, I heard the door close. Immediately, I thought that I was getting pranked because we were talking about spooky stuff earlier. I immediately ran up to the door. I gave it a push, but it didn't open. I realized then that the door was completely closed, even though I left it cracked open. So, using a minimal amount of effort, I pushed open the door and shout, "Really, guys? Trying to scare me?" But I looked around that house, and I can assure you that no one was there. I had my things around 6 feet away from the door, so no one could have closed the door and sprinted away before I could see them, or at least hear them run away. I wasted no time getting to the door in an attempt to catch the prankster in the act, so the whole thing was very strange. My immediate thought was, maybe they're just fast. So I sprinted to the front door and looked outside to see no cars. No one was home. Again, I checked every room and every hiding spot that I could think of, but no one was home but me. I made myself a quick meal as I contemplated an explanation, but to no avail. I resumed the day like it never happened, but every now and then I think about that day. Was it a demon, like my family says? The devil? I recalled the story of the little girl who had died there, and I was around 8 when I was told the story. Now I'm 23. If she had anything to do with this, why now of all times? I, a 29-year-old male, was out partying this Friday night with 4 of my female friends, 2 of which I have just met that evening. We were having drinks at a club in Central Europe. The night was going great. We were dancing and talking. All of us had a lot of fun. At around 2 a.m., the girls grabbed a taxi and went home. I decided to stay a bit more in the club to finish my drink. I've danced on the stage for about 20 minutes. Then I grabbed a taxi and I went home too. When I arrived on the street where I live, my drunk butt realized that I have no keys, and so I couldn't get home as I live alone. So I called another taxi and I went back to the club to look for my keys. First, I went to the bar to ask if anybody has brought any lost keys to them that night. Unfortunately, they didn't have my keys, so I started to look for them in the club and every place that I was that night. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and have been looking for the keys in a mass of people. About 10 minutes go by, and I haven't found anything apart from some broken glass and cigarette butts. I went back to the place where I was initially looking for them. This is the place where we have been having our drinks with the girls before. I've started to look for my keys on the sitting benches instead of on the ground. I had my keys in the inside pocket of my jacket, as I always do, and my jacket was placed in the corner of that bench the whole night before I first left. People were sitting on the benches, and they'd had their jackets on the benches too. I sat down near the corner where I was sitting before, and beside me was a guy with lines of some drugs on his phone, freely giving them to other people. He had put his jacket in the corner of the bench, and I wanted to look at the corner of the bench to see if my keys hadn't been pushed into the corner or something. So I grabbed his jacket, and to my surprise, my keys were right under this guy's jacket, in the middle of the bench. I was drunk, and so I started pretty much yelling that I was so happy to have found them, as I'll admit that I was getting pretty desperate at that moment. Now, there was a guy on that bench that we'd met with the girls before in the club. I'll call him L. He was really nice during the whole night, and so I kept talking to L when I found my keys. I even went to the bar and grabbed another beer just to talk for a bit more with L. I went to the bathroom, and when I came back, El had found himself an acquaintance to which he was talking, so I just started to finish my beer while I smoked a cigarette and was getting ready to go home. This is when the guy that had lines of those drugs I mentioned earlier on his phone had started talking to me. His name was Pedro, and it was definitely a fake name that he gave me. I've been talking with him in English. Pedro was 19 years old and he was from Colombia. He told me stories about his life in Colombia and how his family struggles there. He told me that his father had died recently and he is the oldest son, so he is in Slovakia trying to make some money for the family. He even showed me photos of him and his family back in Colombia. I sympathized with Pedro and I was honestly feeling a bit sorry for him. After about 20 minutes, El had scored with a girl that he met and he said that they were going home. He asked Pedro if he had any MDMA on him and he sold some to them, so El left with the girl. Now, people around on the bench had seen what was happening and so they wanted some stuff from Pedro as well. He started to make lines on his phone again. I told Pedro that I was going home and I wished him best of luck, grabbed my jacket and I started walking. This is when Pedro called out to me and stopped me, said that it was late and he should go back to the hotel too. He scratched the drugs from his phone onto the table, took his belongings and told the people that they can finish whatever was left for free. Me and Pedro had walked out of the underground club at this point, and when we were outside, he asked me if I wanted to walk him to his hotel, which was nearby, just a 5-minute walk. He told me in the club that he really had no friends and no family in Slovakia as well. Again, I sympathized with him. I told him that, sure, I can walk him to the hotel. We were talking the whole walk, and he was saying some really nice things to me, like how I get his situation and how good of a person I am. When we arrived at the hotel, the door was closed and he messaged to someone to come and open the door for him. He asked if I wanted to have one last beer with him, to which I said sure, but I'll be on my way once we finish the beer. Some girl came and opened the door for us. They had spoken in Spanish as they greeted me. The hotel itself didn't really look like a public hotel, I guess. There was a reception and stairs up, and on the left was a dining room. Pedro told me to wait for him in the dining room. This was like 5 in the morning already. I went to the dining room and there was a girl sitting with her laptop there. I greeted her with hola and sat down. Pedro came after, maybe 3 to 5 minutes later, with 2 open cans of some beverages. There was a parrot and a Jack Daniels logo on this. The can was gold in color, I think. But this was the moment that I should have gotten suspicious. And I never should have drunk from that can, that opened can. I was naive and drunk and I overlooked this fact, and I drank from the can. I was talking with Pedro about all the drug cartels in Colombia and how their politics are all messed up. After about 10 minutes, I started to feel weird as well, and I looked at my phone. My hands and eyes were tingling. I was quickly aware of what was happening now. I quickly turned on the location and mobile data on my phone, and I put the phone in a different pocket than I did that night. Pedro started to ask me how I was feeling, to which my adrenaline levels blew up. Quite honestly, I started to think that I was about to be abducted by some Colombian human trafficking ring. My sight started to weirdly tingle and the lights were blinding me at this point. My jaw was messed up as I was pushing my teeth together. I've taken drugs before in the past, and this felt a lot like a stimulant and a dissociative, which was really weird for me to understand. I tried to keep my voice calm and my mind present. I told Pedro that I knew what was going on, and I asked him why he gave me a stimulant if he needs me unconscious. Pedro's hands, they started to shake at this point, and he didn't answer me. The girl at the laptop looked right in my eyes, the first time that she'd even moved with her body. Pedro grabbed his phone and started to write to somebody on WhatsApp. I told Pedro that they'd made a mistake in the dose and that I'm fine apart from having been unknowingly drugged. Quite honestly, I think that Pedro had drugged me back in the club while I went to the toilet. which was why he quickly got up when I was leaving. Everything that I said, Pedro rewrote to somebody else, and he always waited for an incoming message before saying anything to me. I started to talk to the girl too, told her that I don't care about what they were doing there, but I was walking out. At one moment, I remember saying that I get what Pedro was doing, but I don't get what the girl's part was in all of this, to which I was pointing my finger at her. Pedro then got a notification on his phone, and he told me that he was sorry and I can go home if I want. I didn't respond to him, got my drugged butt out of there, and I was walking out of the dining room. I stopped by the girl with her laptop, stared right into her eyes, and I held my right hand up in a fist bump. She looked in my eyes, gave me a fist bump, and did a sort of weird grimace on her face. I walked to the door at the reception, which was now closed. I started to kick and punch the doors while yelling, "Open the door." The receptionist eventually did, and thankfully, I walked out. At this point, my heart was absolutely jumping. My whole body was shaking. I felt crazy dizzy and awake all at the same time. I ran to a main street and I was calling my mum to come and get me as fast as possible, but I didn't know where I was. I was feeling disassociated and couldn't really apprehend what had just happened. As I got to a main street where a bus stop was, I started to feel very paranoid all of a sudden. There was a white Mercedes SUV that had stopped right in the main road near the bus stop that I stood on. They turned off their car lights and were just sort of standing there. I told all of this to my mum, and she told me to look for a camera. So I stood right under a camera which was at the bus stop to make sure that I was seen. I was feeling and talking weirdly, to which my mum told me to talk to her, to tell her what I can see around me. I've seen a few people that walk to the main street. Everybody was on their phone and occasionally looking at me. One guy came close to the bus stop and I approached him while I still had my mum on the phone. I asked what does he want from me, and he was like, "I'm sorry, do I know you?" To which I just said that I was sorry. After about 10 minutes of me being on the phone with my mum, the white SUV turned on the engine and they left. My mum, she came by car soon after, and I was walking to her car on the road, but at this point I really couldn't walk properly. I felt paranoid, tons of adrenaline going through my body. My heart was pumping so fast that I thought that I was going to have some kind of a seizure or a heart attack or something. In the end, I managed to get to my mum's car though. She was in her pajamas and terrified. I started to tell her everything that had happened. I told her to drive around the city instead of driving me home just in case they were following us. We were driving around for maybe an hour, talked about what had happened during the night, how the inside of that building looked and all. My jaw was doing some crazy stuff that my mum could hear it, and she was really scared for me. The whole ride, I felt so weird. At one point, it honestly felt like my soul left my body. It's hard to describe it, but I just didn't feel like myself, like I wasn't real. Lights were blinding me, and my visions were blurring and tingling, and my eyes were going up and down all the time. I didn't feel any rush or euphoria or anything. And in the end, I just thought to myself that they must have given me some sort of a bad mix. I arrived at my home at around 7:30, in the morning that is. My mum stayed at home with me, comforting me the whole time. I tried to sleep, but I just couldn't. We were talking about going to the police and also about if I'm in any kind of danger anymore. And at around 11 in the morning, finally I fell asleep. During this time, my mother cleaned my apartment and my sister came to visit me. Honestly, I don't know what I would do without my family. One of my girlfriends that was with me during that night came to visit me too. As I talked to her, I thought that I got some kind of an episode, like schizophrenic or something. Like, why the heck would I be a target of something like this? I mean, I'm a chubby, bearded guy. Why would they want to abduct me of all people? I'm afraid of going to the police, as our police department and politics are pretty corrupt, and they've always worked with some kind of mafia as long as I can remember. They would take my testimony, start to investigate, and then they would be stopped by their officials, no doubt. I still don't fully believe that what had happened to me was an experience with human trafficking. However, there are so many red flags of it that I can remember that I really can't count it out either. Like, why would Pedro be so scared after I called them out like that? Why would he have stopped talking to me unless someone sent him a message on his phone like that? Why would he even start to message somebody during our conversation? And obviously, why would he drug me without me knowing it? But ultimately, why on earth would he just let me go like that? Eventually, I went to the ER with my mum this early morning as I woke up with spasms all over my body. They gave me an IV and sent a sample of my blood for toxicology reports. They did some tests, EKG and blood pressure, and they've sent me home maybe 3 hours ago. The results of the toxicology, they just came by email to my mum. And, sure enough, there were traces of fentanyl, ethylphenidate, and ketamine all in my blood. Also, while I was being given the IV, the doctor said to my mum that apparently this was not uncommon and that they've had a lot of patients who have been unknowingly drugged during the last few years. He said that it wasn't this common before and that lately there's been a lot more of it. I still don't know why I was drugged like this, but really there's only a few options. 1, it was a kidnapping attempt. 2, I've heard of stories of organ harvesting as well. Or 3, maybe it was some sort of perverted or sexual thing. Whatever the case may be, I am just grateful that I got out of there. When I was 17, I started working for a racehorse trainer and I decided to try and cycle to my new job. Working with horses meant early starts, so my bike ride was in the dark because it was late winter, around January I think. It was 29 years ago in fact, so hard to remember, but the road that I had to cycle on ran partially along the coastline in a series of sweeping S-bends. On one side was cliff face, with nowhere to get off the road for about a mile. On the other, railings and a steep drop down to the sea. Now, as I'm cycling, I notice someone walking ahead on the road in my bike light. They had their back to the traffic, which was just me at the time, and were wearing jeans, a dark mauve bomber jacket, and a backpack as well. Now, I want to emphasize here that this was slightly uphill and I was cycling really slowly, so I had a lot of time to take all this in. I remember thinking that they were walking on the wrong side of the road, but also that if they walked the other side, it wasn't much safer, I guess. I remember watching them walking steadily in front of me, and as I got closer, I was trying to breathe slowly so I didn't sound so unfit and embarrass myself. It wasn't so unusual to see people walking like this, because the area at the time was very rural and there was no bus in town until you get into like the main village, which was the direction that we were headed, so I figured that they were walking to catch a bus for work or whatever. But before I drew up beside him, I pulled away a little to give him some room, then called out morning, so I didn't startle the guy. And as I did though, I suddenly realized that he just wasn't there. What I mean too is that he didn't fade away or anything like that. He just wasn't there anymore. The reason that it scared me so much at the time too is that I had spent probably 3 or 4 minutes coming up behind this guy who walked very normally and honestly looked very solid. And then all of a sudden he was just gone. I have other stories, but they're more noises and feelings, that kind of thing. But this is the one thing that I will always hand on heart insist was a real ghost encounter, and not something explained away easily by anyone. Also, after this, I managed to secure a ride with another employee, so I never had to cycle that road again. My mum, stepdad, and I have lived in our house for around 15 years. I'm 21. Mum says that I've had a presence attached to me since I was a baby, and honestly, that does track, because there is a very obvious presence attached to me, even still in our house, that just sort of lurks in my room. None of that really bothers me too much, nor do the noises, things we've seen in the corner of our eyes, stuff that's moved, or eerie feelings that we've gotten in our time there. But this morning, something new and a whole different level of terrifying happened. My mum left for work at 5:30. I heard her pull out of the driveway. Then at 6, the garbage man came and my dog freaked out. He was in the living room and I was laying in bed, down the hall, waiting for him to just calm down a bit. Then I heard a woman say his name very clearly, loudly and concisely. He kept barking and I perked up at this, thinking that either my mum was still home or I was hearing things. I just brushed it off when I then heard her again. She said, "Be quiet," and sure enough, my dog stopped barking. I texted my mum to make sure that she wasn't actually home, and she told me that she had been gone for 30 minutes as I expected. So I went through the house and nobody was there. It could not have been anyone else either. I mean, nobody would have just shown up at 6 a.m., scolded my dog, and then left. Mum asked what happened, and I told her, and she told me that a week ago she was asleep in her room when she heard a woman loudly say, "Oh," right beside her ear, and she bolted up. She said that she was sure that she heard it, but had felt like she was going crazy, until I told her what I heard this morning. We described it to each other, and it's the same, a mature woman's voice. It cannot be a squatter, or at least we're pretty sure it's not. We have a crawl space that is impossible to access without knocking a bunch of stuff off the shelf in front of it, and an attic that is also impossible to access without opening an extremely loud and heavy door. What I'm wondering, though, is why this entity, or whatever it is, has decided to all of a sudden become vocal in a way that we've never seen or heard here before, when we've been here for over a decade now. Any insight would be much appreciated because, quite honestly, this is really terrifying. The house that I grew up in, the same one that my parents and one of my brothers live in to this day, is very active with, well, what we call benevolent spirits. For some quick context, I grew up sharing a house with 2 female spirits. I felt their energy, I guess you could say, had encounters, and I still notice them lingering around when I go to visit my parents to this day. One of the most intense encounters happened back in 2007, though. I was 13, my brother was 12, and the twins were 7 at this point. It was a humid day from memory, with thunderstorm warnings and dark skies. I remember it being late summer, and the whole week prior was thunderstorm after thunderstorm. The storms, they knocked the power out eventually, leaving the house dimly lit by candles and flashlights. My parents, they were in the garage, trying to get our generator to start, so that my mum could at least have a cup of tea by boiling water in the kettle. Us kids, of course, wanted to be able to charge our Nintendo DS's, since that was our obsession like many kids growing up in the mid-2000s. Anyway, I was sitting in the basement with my brothers. We were all sitting on the sectional, waiting for the power to come back on. Our DS's were all drained of power, and we were unsure of what to do. My brother Chad, he mentioned to me that he wanted to grab something from up in our bedroom that we shared, but didn't want to go up alone. I knew that he was afraid of the dark, so I didn't bother to question him anymore. We climbed the stairs from the basement, walked through the tiled hallway that connects to the kitchen, and then turned left to face the stairs going to the second floor. It was only 10 or so steps, not a very steep or strenuous climb to make by any means. There was just pitch black in front of us, but suddenly a deep, foreboding feeling just ran right through me. I always felt in tune with my intuitions, and I try my best to listen to them. But this time, things just suddenly happened before I could do anything else. With our flashlights still pointing up the stairs, lightning flashed and illuminated the hallway. Now, if you're standing where my brother and I were, you would see a hallway at the top of the stairs, which only went about 12 feet or so forward until you would run into the door to a linen closet. And, standing in front of that linen closet at the end of the hallway, suddenly there was just a woman. The brightness of the lightning almost hurt my eyes, yet I could still make out this woman standing upstairs. She was wearing a long skirt and a button-up shirt. I couldn't place an exact time period to the clothes, and I still can't to this day. I just know that it was from years, even decades prior to 2007. This figure was not facing us. She was sort of staring off to the left of the hall, towards my other brother's room. I can remember this intense feeling of fear suddenly. Now I think it was because we had no idea an apparition of a woman would appear before us, not because this spirit was evil or anything. But after what felt like a minute, Chad and I bolted towards the living room, hopping onto the couch, and we just sat there, wide-eyed and probably staring into nothing, trying to piece together what we just saw. Luckily, nothing paranormal or strange happened for the rest of that evening. We just went back downstairs, played our Nintendo Wii, hoping to forget what we saw as the generator came back on. But I remember wondering who that apparition exactly was. She was much younger than the other lady, who we named Tara. And from then on, I realized that it wasn't just Tara in our home. This woman would make more appearances in the future, and I guess, luckily for us, she would be friendly for the most part in those situations. So this happened at two instances. One on February 5th, 6:30 in the morning, and today at 6:16 a.m. So I'll start the first time that it actually happened. I went to the laundry room to put on a load of washing, and only the lights were on in the laundry room, and the light in my room, which illuminated a bit of the hallway, was there as well. So when I was finished with my laundry, I then heard footsteps, and I looked around the corner and saw a dark figure running at me with heavy footsteps. I automatically assumed that it was my brother, so I yelled his name. Then the figure took a sudden right to the living room. A bit confused because he would usually answer, I turned on the light to the living room, and to my shock, there was absolutely no one there. I went to my brother's room and asked him if he left his room, which he replied, "No, I haven't." So obviously that sent a shiver down my spine. Today, at around 6:15, still in my bed, I opened my eyes and I saw my younger brother standing next to my closet holding his tablet, not facing towards me, just whole body was pointing at my closet. I thought that was a bit weird because, my door was closed, so I closed my eyes to try to fall back asleep. Then I decided suddenly to open my eyes again, and I see him much closer, like standing on the side of my bed from me and still in the same position, just way closer. I tried to say something, but all of a sudden I felt like I just couldn't speak. I fought with that for a bit, and then eventually I said, "Talk." Multiple times I said this, then all of a sudden, whoever was there just up and vanished. I got up, unable to believe what I had just seen, went to my younger brother's room, and there he was, fast asleep in his bed. That again sent shivers down my spine. I've thought about it, and maybe it was sleep paralysis or something. I'm not sure though, because I was still able to move, and I was wide awake. And I know what sleep paralysis feels like, and it really didn't feel like that. In any case, I have no idea what to do about all of this, so if you've got any advice for me, then please do let me know. This all started when I was around the age of 14. My younger brother and I decided to swap rooms at one stage, and from the first night that I slept in my new room, weird things started happening. I usually sleep through the night, but I started abruptly waking up at exactly 2:17 a.m. on the dot every single night. Each time I would wake up, I always felt that sixth sense that something or someone was watching me from the right corner of my bedroom, always. I've felt good energy from, spirits or whatever you want to call them before, when family members have passed, but this was something different. It seemed invasive, intimidating, and I was freaked out that whatever this was could see me, but I couldn't see it. What's weird too was when I slept at my mum's house, I never woke up at 2:17, only at my dad's house. Then small occurrences started to happen too. I was staying at my mum's when my dad informed me my alarm clock radio turned on by itself in the middle of the night at full volume and woke the whole family up. I hadn't been to his house in days, and when I was home again, my little brother and we would play in the driveway. He had to go to the bathroom at one point, so he went back in the house, but all of a sudden a tennis ball came flying out of the garage. That made absolutely no sense because he was nowhere near the garage. One night I heard paper shuffling on my desk, even though the window was closed. A different morning, I watched my dad's sunglasses on the kitchen counter move several inches by themselves when I was the only one awake. My older sibling, he began to believe me when random lights would come on by themselves in the house too. What's strange too is that we caught onto the pattern that the paranormal activity would happen mostly when my little brother wasn't home. Fast forward to when the house was empty, since my parents were on vacation. My grandma would check in on the house with my siblings, and each time they'd go back, a new light would be on. The last night before my parents came back from vacation, she triple-checked all the lights were off. My parents were definitely surprised when they arrived home to find every light on in the house. My grandma swore that our house was actually cursed and refused to visit anymore. My stepmom then began to believe my paranormal stories too. My older brother and I heard footsteps running up and down the stairs together one night when my younger brother was at a sleepover. It really freaked us out, and at one point, it even got sort of dangerous because the gas stove burners had been turned on by themselves on low heat overnight. If any of this had been a prank previously, I can guarantee that no one in our family would mess around like that, putting our lives in danger. My dad finally began to believe me too about maybe 8 months into this haunting when all of the kids weren't home one night, and he apparently heard whispering in the hallway. He freaked out, grabbed his knife thinking that there was a robber. When he opened the door, he found my TV had turned on by itself and people were talking on the TV with low volume. The last thing to ever happen was one night I came out of the shower and I went to change into my room. The mirror was foggy from the steam. My older brother knocked on my door and asked what I wrote on the mirror. Confused, I went in to look, and we both sat there in awe as letters began to actually show up in front of us slowly. The whole family quickly gathered around to decipher it, and it said, "I am watching," and then there was a word that we couldn't quite figure out. Our family didn't know how to justify what we saw, and after that day, the occurrences just all of a sudden stopped. I stopped waking up every night. There were no footsteps, nothing. A year later, my dad called me and said that he found something really weird on my brother's birth certificate. He asked, "Didn't you used to say that Nick, our younger brother, was somehow connected to, like, the haunted stuff that happened in the house or whatever?" After confirming, he casually mentioned that my younger brother was born at exactly 2:17 a.m. I was pretty much speechless. I mean, there was no way that this was a coincidence. From that day on, I have had so many more questions than answers too. 2 years ago, I had a psychic medium meeting, and after sharing my story, she said how the entity targeted me because I acknowledged it. It was no longer in the house. She confidently said that an entity like that is attached to an object or a person that has since left the house, which means that I definitely think that something was, or maybe is, attached to my younger brother. So, a few weeks back, I shared a story about potentially being watched by someone that was lurking outside of my house. I don't know if you guys remember it, but the TLDR is that I saw someone walking around outside of our house, sort of down the side of our house, with burglar lights coming on next to the free library that my parents had set up just outside of our house. So, to cut a long story short, there hasn't been any activity since that night. But I was on a phone call the very next night with a friend when I noticed someone standing outside, completely shrouded in darkness. I proceeded to talk loudly about how some creep was watching me, and they'd better watch out. Stupid, yes, I know, but it seemed to work because all was pretty much quiet after that. Or so I thought. You see, tonight was one of my oldest friends' last nights in town, so I was out till about 9:30, drove 2 friends home and then myself. Since it was so early, I wasn't that worried, but still alert. I drove up the side of the street that he hit on last time, even though it was out of my way, and saw nothing out of the ordinary. I noticed one of the new houses that's being built had its lights on, which I didn't think much of at that moment. Fast forward an hour though, and I start hearing a weird, sort of loud banging sound across the way. I know that it's risky, but I'm not letting a horrible person dictate my comfort, and I've also been watching for activity or pretending so I can maybe catch them. I've also kept my window open as usual, hence why it was dumb to razz him up the other night by talking about someone watching me, but I digress. Whatever it was, it stopped, so I wrote it off, which was in the end a very big mistake. Because shortly after, I started hearing banging again, but this time I could actually feel it. It was coming from my house. I genuinely freaked out, like knives out status, but much more cowardly, cowering on my bedroom floor with my ear pressed to the door and knife in hand. It was a strange hollow sound that didn't seem like the front door, and in the end it wasn't. I once again called 911, describing what was happening and thinking that they'd probably are going to write it off because I sort of sounded crazy. I still feel in shock because, this only just happened, but thankfully the kind dude on the line definitely took me seriously and said someone would be on their way. For the record too, the police department is like a 3-minute drive from my house. I ended up tiptoeing downstairs to see and once again felt my heart stop. I went to the front window, ducked down, and there wasn't anyone at the front door. Then the banging starts up again, and I can tell how close it is now. I go to the side window that overlooks the garage, and that was when I saw him, dressed in black, hood pulled far over his face, banging wildly on the garage door with a crowbar. I honestly don't know why he wasn't using the crowbar to break in or whatever, but I'm super glad that he didn't, as the door inside the garage that leads into the house, it's always left unlocked. To say that I panicked is honestly a vast understatement. I nearly wet myself, which is understandable, right? I'm just standing there, peeking out of the window, watching this guy wail on my garage door with a crowbar, thinking how unhinged he must be and how much I want the cops to get here now, when, just like before, suddenly he just runs off. I quite literally just got done giving a report to the cops that showed up. My family was woken up and had to talk to them as well, as they're the homeowners. And now they're both so freaked out that my dad just ordered 4 exterior cameras to monitor the house. I really don't think it's over yet, too. This man has some reason that he's targeting my house, possibly me, who knows, since he started out by watching outside of my window. But whatever the case, we are definitely thinking about security now and exactly what steps we need to take next. So, I'm coming here for some advice because I feel some sort of dreadful presence in my house, specifically in my kitchen and living room, but they aren't separated. I'm 20 and I live with just my mum. I don't really know where to start, but I've had multiple different physical things happen in my kitchen while I'm home. Let me also say, though, that I moved into this house not even a full 2 years ago, and I've never had previous encounters with anything paranormal. I guess I'll just run down the list of encounters, starting with the first one and leading up to the most recent. So, the first instance was maybe about 2 or 3 months after I moved in. My mum, whose bedroom is on the first floor, said that she woke up at about 3 a.m. to wind chimes making noise in our kitchen. She walked out there and actually also saw them moving. My mum loves wind chimes, and before this she always had some inside, but we took them down after this because there was no wind. The second instance was, this was the first event I actually saw with my own eyes. Last winter, maybe around November of 2022, I was sitting with my ex-girlfriend on the couch watching TV in the living room. We had been there for maybe 35 to 45 minutes when, out of nowhere, my lunchbox flies off of the top of the refrigerator and lands on the floor about 5 feet in front of it. I paused the show and was absolutely freaked out since the only people home at that time were me and her, so I picked it up and put it back on top of the fridge. My ex was already freaked out, so we both just went upstairs. I'm not sure if this is important or not too, but afterwards I told my sister, who is well versed with pagan witchcraft practices, to read tarot cards regarding this situation. A few times she pulled cards with cats playing on them. She told me the spirit is likely a dead pet that wants someone to play with. She also did some sort of a sage ritual at this time as well. Again, I don't know if it's helpful or not, or if it's related or whatever, but I just thought that I should throw that in. Now, the third incident, and this happened 2 days ago, and this was the second thing I actually saw with my own eyes. I have a home gym, and sometimes I'll work out after work. And 2 days ago, I was home alone, just working out in the basement. And when I finished, I walked upstairs to the kitchen to make my protein drink and eat some strawberries. There was the creepy feeling as always in that room, but I try to ignore it. I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing off strawberries and eating them, and I looked up out of the window that's behind the sink. It was completely dark in my backyard at this point, and I couldn't see anything but the reflection of the room behind me. When I looked up, I saw what appeared to be a blurry black figure moving very quickly from one side of the living room behind me to the other. I couldn't make out any features because I only saw it for about a half a second, and I don't even know if it had any at all, to be honest. And when I say fast, I mean this thing was fast, like the same speed of a human full sprinting from like one side of my living room to another. I instantly turned around, but there was absolutely nothing there. I was freaking out though, and I started saying stuff like, "Whatever you are, you're not welcome here and you need to leave. This is my house, I live here, and I don't want you here. You need to go." Then I walked upstairs and laid in my bed until my mum got home, because I don't get this eerie or creepy feeling when there's somebody else home. Eventually I showered and I went to bed. The fourth instance, after instance 3, I debated not saying anything to my mum because, well, I don't want to freak her out since she sleeps on the first floor. But last night I decided that I'd tell her, and she was understandably a little bit freaked out by it. This morning my mum calls me while I'm at work and tells me that she herself was withholding experiences from me too because she also didn't want to freak me out. Now, my mum runs a small business out of the part of the basement located directly underneath the kitchen and living room, and she told me that she has at least a dozen times heard footsteps in the kitchen above her walking around when she is sure that she is the only one home. Apparently, this is why she plays her music so loud when she's down there. From my phone call with her this morning, I learned she got into contact with some people from her church, and soon she'll be having someone who specializes in spirits or whatever to come and take a look. Now, the fifth and final instance, I'm not entirely sure if this was just in my head or an actual encounter because, I was actually on something that day. Not my first time, so I know how to function, but about a month ago, I decided to trip in my house with my current girlfriend and 2 other friends. For the majority of the trip, we stayed upstairs watching some TV shows. The Midnight Gospel on Netflix, highly recommend by the way. And I had to go downstairs to take a pee, so I went down by myself, and I swear that while I was coming down the stairs, I saw what looked to be a woman's face smiling in a really unsettling way at me from the couch. I had some laundry on the couch and I saw the face vividly in the laundry. This really disturbed me too, and I just sprinted to the bathroom to take a pee, and then I sprinted back upstairs for the rest of the night. I would also like to add that in the mornings before work, 5:45 a.m., still very dark outside, and at nighttime, when I'm in the kitchen by myself, I feel an uncomfortable sensation, almost like the feeling you get when somebody is watching you. Of course, every time I look around, I'm alone, but I just feel this sense of intense dread. My house is also silent, and rarely ever do I hear any noise from outside, since my house is surrounded on 3 sides with trees. All of these accounts, though, they are honest, and I believe that I described what I've seen and my experiences to the best of my ability. I would really appreciate any advice that people can give me on how to get rid of this thing, as it's low-key scaring the heck out of me, and it's causing me not to like going into my kitchen or living room at nighttime. Back in October of 2004, I lost a cousin that I was close to due to an accidental overdose. His brother Mick and I are even closer because we are close to the same age, and we pretty much were raised in the same house as brother and sister as well. Now, one day in February of 2005, Mick called me and he sounded very upset about a phone call that he had received. So I told him to come to my house so that I could figure out what he was talking about. When he got out of his car, he was as white as a sheet and shaking. This is what he told me when he was finally able to calm down. He said that he was driving when his phone rang. It was one of his parents calling from their house. Since he was driving, he let the call go to voicemail and pulled over to call them back, not bothering to listen to the voicemail. He said that his dad answered the phone, and both his parents denied even calling him in the first place, even though Mick's caller ID clearly indicated that someone else in the house had called him when the voicemail was recorded. After hanging up with his parents, Mick decided to see what the voicemail had to say. After he listened to it, that's when he called me in a panic. He refused to tell me anything about the voicemail. Instead, he just queued it up and shoved the phone up to my ear so that I could hear it for myself. And I will never forget that voicemail. I felt the color drain from my face, and I felt like I was going to pass out. I distinctly heard my cousin, who had been dead for nearly 4 months at this point, say, "It's me, I'm here, and I need your help." My cousin also had a very unusual cadence and sound to his speech. It was unmistakably him leaving a voicemail from his parents' home phone number where he accidentally overdosed and lost his life. But he seemed scared or worried or something. Unfortunately, 11 years later, there was a house fire that destroyed everything in the house, including that voicemail that we had pulled off of Mick's phone and saved on a computer. But that voicemail, it changed my life drastically, and my cousin and I dove into researching the paranormal ever since then. I really wish that I still had that voicemail recording too. And while that's not proof positive for a lot of other people, and I know that there are skeptics who aren't going to believe my experience, I wanted to share why I became an investigator in the first place. And also I'm wondering if any of you guys are into the paranormal, and why did you guys get into it? I would love to hear about your experiences as well if you'd be willing to share. The last time that I had sleep paralysis, it was very, for a lack of a better term, demonic. I felt and saw the presence of 3 entities, one on top of me, one in the corner, and one trying to unlock my bedroom door. I never sleep with my door unlocked. My sister, the previous day, also had the same occurrence, and I will never forget that my mum said that week she had heard stuff in the room. This time it was the last night, and significantly less demonic. I opened my eyes and could feel the sleep paralysis starting to take over me, and I violently started to try and shake my leg and snap out of it. I could feel someone in the room, though, shaking my bed violently, trying to harass me. Mind you, ever since I had my first sleep paralysis, if I'm alone, I sleep with my LED lights on dim and never lay on my back because I feel vulnerable and prone to sleep paralysis if I do. My first time doing that was very traumatizing, let me tell you. Now, back to what I was seeing. I was on my back and could only look straight up and see what was in my vision range. I sleep by a window and I could see a ridiculous amount of flies around the curtains hung at my window. The only time that you can see that amount of flies is if something is dead or rotten. I was really confused. I was violently trying to wake my body up. I could really only mutter a prayer to save myself from things getting potentially worse. I then felt a pressure on my chest like the last time I had it. Only this time I couldn't see a demon until towards the end when I saw an entity slowly trying to creep on top of me wearing a white sweater and floral pants. The nightmare was over soon enough for me to wake up completely confused and startled. But the weirdest thing was that those flies, they were real. They were all over the curtain and it absolutely freaked me out. I instantly ran out of the room and went to get some spray for all of them. But can anyone explain this? It was so weird. Praying seems to be my only way out. I would generally consider myself a skeptic. I don't really believe in this kind of stuff, usually, but I've been having some strange experiences. I don't really have anyone else to turn to, so I hope that this place might get me some answers, or at the very least, rule out some options. So, it started back a few months ago. My house is small and only has 3 tiny bedrooms. The majority of the time I've lived here, there are 5 people here. I shared a room with my sister up until October of 2023, when my brother moved out and she took his old room. A while after that is when I started to notice odd things. At first, it was generally just paranoia, I guess. In my room, and only in my room for at least an hour before I go to sleep, I would get really paranoid. It could be a feeling of being watched or sort of being hyper aware of noises, but I would just be really anxious. Then things picked up a bit. I started to feel something hovering over my ear, never seeing anything but feeling it deeply. That sort of tickle when somebody whispers to you. Like that, but just hovering over my ear. This only ever happened to my right ear as well, which was strange. It just so happens that when I lay on my left side, I face a mirror as it's my closest door. Apparently that's bad luck, I hear, but anyway, it goes on from here because one night as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a man clearly whisper, "Stay awake," in my right ear, which scared the heck out of me for obvious reasons. And I felt that same hovering sort of watched feeling as well. Lately too, I've noticed things moving across my vision. Shadows in the corner of my eyes and little white blurs across my vision. This really only ever happens in my bedroom and not much else. I've also noticed something worse when I sleep as well. You see, I often sleep with my hand under my pillow, and sometimes my hand peeks out from under the pillow, and that is when it happens. Something is, well, grabbing my hand. It always starts at my index finger and pulls slightly on it as if trying to be discreet. Then it works its way to my pinky. Then it goes back to the index finger, only this time it makes sort of small circular motions with it while pressing it on my pillow lightly. It does this with each one until it reaches my pinky. Then after that, it always shakes my headboard. I've also noticed that my mattress shakes slightly while I sleep, which is definitely not normal. And as far as I can recall, this is all the detail that I have as of now. I'm really worried that I have a ghost of some kind in my house, and I'm also worried because, well, mental illness runs in my family and my grandpa had schizophrenia. So here I am asking you, do I have a ghost or should I be evaluated instead? And if I do have a ghost, well, what can I do about it? I'll try to answer as many responses as possible, so feel free to ask or clarify anything in the comments below. I'll try to answer as many responses as possible, so feel free to ask any clarification or comments or whatever below. So, my mum and I were visiting my family and staying in a cabin at my uncle's ranch. There's a main house, a bunch of animal pens or fields, a dog kennel, and then there's the guest cabin across the lot from the main house. There are other homes nearby, so it wasn't super remote or anything, but we were surrounded by forest, mountains, and obviously some fields. So, middle of the night, my mum and I are sleeping and we both wake up because there's suddenly a really strong, weird smell permeating the cabin. We commented that it must be a skunk, but also, both of our dogs sat up and got restless. They didn't bark or make any noise. I was having trouble getting back to sleep with the smell, and getting the dogs to lay down again was difficult as well. So I just went outside to have a cigarette in the end. It was pretty much pitch black at this point, but I could see my immediate area from a dim porch light. I was leaning against my car and I started to hear someone walking across the gravel. From the sound, I presume that the footsteps originated from the forest area behind the barn, then walked through the gravel parking area and turned toward the cabin. I thought that it was weird that whoever it was seemed to have passed by the kennel, and the dogs weren't making any noise. None of the animals were, in fact. But I figured that it had to have been my uncle or one of my cousins out doing something. I was curious what they were doing out so late at night. I was tracking where the footsteps were from the sound as they were getting closer, and just waiting for someone to walk near enough that I would see who they were. I almost called out too, but in the end I decided to wait. Eventually, though, I saw what appeared to be someone wearing a hairy brown coat walking toward the field next to me. Now this is where it gets weird. You see, it was getting closer and about to walk by me, parallel by about maybe 6 to 10 feet, It was close enough that I realized that what I thought was a person in a hairy brown coat was actually the bottom half of a large creature on 2 legs. The bottom half, 2 legs and hindquarters, was about the size of an average adult and also appeared brown. The top half, that I could only make out in the silhouette, appeared black. Honestly, I couldn't tell how tall it was in the dark, but it just walked by and then into the field that was next to the cabin. Also, the gate wasn't open. I checked the next morning, so it would have had to have stepped over it to get into the field. I kind of registered what I saw, thought that I should probably be freaking out, but in the end I just sort of went back inside and I went back to bed. I did a little walk through the property the next day, to make sure all the animals were there and unharmed. And in the end, I only told my mum about the experience. We ended up coming back the next month, and she told my aunt and uncle about it then. I fully expected them to make fun of me for talking about Bigfoot, but my aunt, she just asked for some clarification and said that her sister had told them about seeing something similar, which honestly only made things 10 times freakier. This happened a few weeks ago, and I haven't been able to sleep well since. It just plays over in my mind again and again. Nothing like this has ever happened to me before, and hopefully it won't happen again. So, a bit of backstory first. I suffer from night terrors. I've done so for about 6 years, since my youngest was born. I think it's night terrors anyway. It's like my eyes are open and I'm aware of my surroundings but see things that aren't there. Or at least that's what I've always thought. Someone has said that this might be sleep paralysis, but I've never been aware that I can't move, if that makes sense. I thought that you couldn't move with sleep paralysis anyway, but maybe one of you will know, but I don't know what causes it, and don't really know how to control it, but I have somewhat gotten used to it, I guess. It happens a few times per week. I should probably speak to a sleep specialist about it, I know, but normally it's a tall man standing behind my door. He doesn't do anything, just sort of stands silently and watches. When I come around properly, it's my dressing gowns or coats hanging on the back of the door, causing the shape of a tall man. Every time my heart beats out of my chest for a few seconds, but mostly I can just roll over and go back to sleep, convincing myself that I was just being deceived by something in my room. Anyway, this night, though, I was asleep or awake. I don't know how to describe this state, but my bedroom door swung open and a child walked into my room. Not unusual as well, as I have two, an 8-year-old female and a 6-year-old male. It was dark, being the middle of the night, so I just saw the little figure come in. I watched the child walk around my bed. I sleep on the side closest to the door, to the foot of the opposite side of my king-size bed, like they were going to climb in on the other side, and I said, "Hey, are you okay?" They didn't reply. And without me feeling them climbing on the bed, a hand grabbed my foot, maybe 5 feet away from where they were previously standing. I have terribly ticklish feet, and I accidentally kicked out when they did it, and I kicked the child that I didn't feel climbing into my bed. My heart sank and I rolled away to turn on my lamp saying, "Oh, sorry." But when I turned back there was no child. I jumped out of bed thinking that I'd knocked them off the bed or something and just didn't hear it. I looked around, but there was no one. I checked the kids' rooms and sure enough, they are both safe and sound in their beds, fast asleep. I know that it sounds mad, but I'm physically shaking sharing this. I to this day do not know what happened and have thought about it endlessly every night when I go to bed. I don't know if I was just imagining things, but man, it just felt so real. This happened way back in 2017. I, a female and 16, was in the 5th grade at the time. Me and my sister, female and 19, were sharing a room and we were casually just talking.
She was in middle school and I was in elementary. Keep in mind too that I live in a 2-story house, and the rail that goes along the stairs is like a metal gate, so you're able to see downstairs. Now, at night, you really can't see anything when looking down the stairs. It's literally just pitch black, so all you can really do is hear movement. That night, me and my sister were just hanging out, and all of a sudden we hear a deep raspy voice that's coming from the dark, and it said my sister's name, and we completely froze. Then, a couple of seconds later, it said my sister's name again, but with more force in its voice, and that was when me and her slammed and locked the door. My stomach turned so much, and I had such a horrible feeling that I honestly felt that we were about to die. I always tell people that it sounded like a clown that lost its voice almost. It was really raspy and scary, and it just didn't sound normal at all. Now, the only people home were my aunts and my cousin, but they were asleep and my mum's boyfriend had just left to work on a car, so me and my sister were the only ones awake. We knew that somebody was inside, but we had no idea what to do at this point. And then it just got really, really silent. We could hear footsteps coming up the stairs too. We started freaking out though, obviously, especially since we didn't have anything to protect ourselves with if something happened. I was on the phone with the 911 dispatcher though, while my sister was on the phone with my mum, and my mum made me hang up on the dispatcher for whatever reason. Anyway, my mum's boyfriend gets here and not a single thing was moved. Everything was locked and no one was in the house. To this day though, I truly believe that somebody was with us that night. I think about it every day, and I truly thought that I was about to die that night from an intruder. I do believe that this house has a couple of, like spirits roaming around, but I haven't had anything else like that happen ever again since then. It was a strange night, and I think about it all the time.